Okay, the meeting is now resumed in public session. Just before we begin, to remind members and witnesses to make sure their mobile phones are completely turned off, please, as they interfere with the broadcasting system here in the chamber. We're here today to discuss, and we'd like to welcome from VideoParliament Mr. Paul Brennan, Director of Markets, and Mr. Shane Hamill, Overseas Trade Manager. We're here today to discuss the issue of Brexit and the preparedness of VideoParliament from that point of view, and the implications and so on and so forth of Brexit in the agriculture sector. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of evidence to give to the committee. However, you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter to qualified privilege. In respect of the evidence you give, you are directed by that only evidence connected with subject matter of these proceedings to be given. You are asked to respect to parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise and make charges against a person or entity by name in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on or criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official either by name or in such way as to make him or her identifiable. Mr. Brennan, now I ask you to make your opening statement, please, and then we'll take questions from the members.
Thank you, Chairman. Before we begin, I'd like to send out my apologies on behalf of Tara McCarthy, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us here today for personal reasons. I'd like to thank you and the other members of the committee for the opportunity to brief the committee on the latest position in relation to Brexit from the perspective of Board BIA. And I'm joined today by my colleague Shane Hamill, who's Overseas Trade Manager with us and who manages our Brexit activities and supports. Overall, the value of food and drink exports increased by 13% to €12.6 billion in 2017. The share of exports destined for the UK declined from 37% in 2016 to 35% last year. However, despite losing share, exports to the UK actually increased by an estimated 7% in 2017 to some €4.4 billion, despite the ongoing weakness of sterling and the uncertainty created by Brexit. This is very much driven by increased demand and strong prices, particularly in relation to dairy and to a lesser extent beef. Year on year to date in 2018, up to the end of Q2, exports of Irish food and drink to the UK were 2% higher, again driven largely by increases in meat and dairy, which helped offset some fall in terms of seafood and beverages. The value of our exports to other European markets increased from €3.5 billion in 2016 to €4.1 billion in 2017. And other EU markets now account for about a third of our total exports. The value of our exports to markets outside the European Union increased from €3.5 billion to €4 billion in 2017, with international markets now accounting for 32% of our total trade. Despite the challenges posed by Brexit, the UK remains the most important market for Irish food and drink manufacturers, and exporters remain fully committed to defending current market share and, where possible, growing business there in the years ahead. Board Bia's Brexit Barometer is a risk diagnostic tool designed to assess individual company level impacts that Brexit can pose. This year's barometer was launched by Board Bia on the 23rd of March and for 6 weeks with an aim to measure the progress of our client companies as they prepare for Brexit. Key objectives of this exercise were to measure progress against key strategic issues, identify evolving client priorities and concerns, and indeed to further inform Board Bia's own programmes and supports for our client companies. The barometer this year took the form of an online survey, which was completed by 117 client companies who, between them, would account for almost a half of our total food and drink exports to the UK. The results demonstrate that Brexit impacts vary depending on a number of factors, including both individual company preparedness and sector-level issues such as export dependency, supply chain complexity, and access to inputs. It also assesses potential impacts for industry around maintaining customer relationships in the UK, logistics challenges, and cost increases arising from customs checks, SPS inspections, and the UK land bridge, as well as new export requirements such as documentation and a potential further depreciation of sterling. The results of the Brexit Barometer were published by ourselves on the 21st of June this year and revealed that while 60% of respondents remain uncertain as to the impact of Brexit, 73% of them have made minor or clear progress in preparing for potential outcomes. The barometer found that 85% of respondents have spoken to key customers in the UK about Brexit in the past 12 months, and of those, around 80% have discussed the issue with their customers on 2 to 3 occasions. Of those that have not, 42% reported that buyers had not indicated a wish to discuss Brexit with them. 80% of the participants believe that they continue to have opportunities to actually increase sales to the UK, and potential strategies for increasing sales to the UK align around new product development, enhanced key account management and marketing strategies. Indeed, 54% of the clients that responded to the barometer now have tailored marketing strategies in place for the UK market, which is up from 39% a year earlier. 62% of respondents have mapped their supply chains to identify possible challenges arising from Brexit, whilst only 40% have taken steps to reduce supply chain costs. What we have seen in the last year has been a significant increase in client awareness of whether supply chain partners are Brexit ready. In 2017, 68% of participants were unsure as to whether their supply chain partners are Brexit ready, and 12 months later this figure had dropped to 40%. There has been modest progress in understanding possible customs implications of Brexit on companies. Indeed, 45% of respondents feel that they have either a significant or a reasonable amount of experience in complying with official requirements, while over half of respondents feel comfortable identifying the tariff classifications of their products. Over 3/4 of the respondents have identified their risk and exposure to currency fluctuations, and indeed have taken strong action in relation to market diversification, with 85% of the respondents actively seeking to expand business into new markets. And indeed, 3/4 of them have reported sales growth to non-EU markets in the past 12 months. The most attractive growth markets outside of the UK have been continental Europe, North America and the Middle East. As well as the launch of the results, we launched a recommendations report in conjunction with the overall findings of the Brexit barometer. This recommendations report has been disseminated to clients on an ongoing basis and very much focuses on outlining practical steps that companies can take to become Brexit ready. It also flags Board B and other state supports and contains a template to help companies draft their own company-specific Brexit plan. A benchmark report was also launched and circulated to each respondent, outlining how they score in their preparedness alongside peer companies by turnover and also against overall responses. The objective of this is to highlight where each individual company should place their focus, which allows them to target their resources in the year ahead into areas that require attention. In terms of Board B, we focus on increasing the skills of the industry in managing the key pressure points identified through the Brexit barometer around customs and currency risk and supply chain. Since November 2017, Board B has been running a customs training programme made up of 4 two-hour sessions for clients. And each client also receives a 2-hour confidential one-to-one mentoring session to work through sensitive commercial information and ensure tailored solutions by company. Over 50 clients have availed of this training or will have availed of this training by the end of the year. A currency training programme was also launched in November 17 and has assisted 24 clients to design a treasury policy and foreign exchange strategy. This helps companies prepare for buyer meetings, prepare for tendering and negotiations, and will also support existing and new business development. According to the results of the Brexit barometer, the supply chain is one of the highest risks emerging from the uncertainty around the UK's future status as a trading partner with the EU. Increased lead times, especially when related to short shelf life products, in conjunction with a complex and intense supply chain, is a key issue facing the industry. Board B's Supply Chain Logistic Guide helps businesses optimise supply chain operations by reducing costs and identifying solutions to potential disruptions and identifying the right partner. The guide is aimed at current and potential exporters who wish to review their logistical operations for servicing both existing and new markets in Europe. Diversifying into new markets will challenge companies to review their existing supply chain and logistics channels. Board B's Logistics Partner Database enables Irish companies to identify logistics service providers operating both in-market at a national level and internationally. As markets continue to evolve, exporters will need to look beyond their incumbent provider and become more educated in the options available. The database that Board B has developed focuses on the UK, Germany, France, the Netherlands, Spain and Poland. Board B has hosted 3 supply chain workshops with a total of 87 companies attending, focused on bringing the recommendations of the Logistic Guide to life, exploring optimisation opportunities and identifying KPIs for logistics partners. If the export growth trends evident between 2009 and 2017 continue, international markets outside of the EU will account for over 40% of Irish food and drink exports by 2025. Global population growth, along with increased urbanisation and affluence, and the intensifying challenges of climate change provide the macro context for this opportunity. Bord Bia was commissioned by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine to undertake an in-depth market prioritisation exercise. And this focuses very much on identifying relatively new markets that are likely to present growth opportunities over the next 5 to 10 years, and assess these opportunities against the capability of Ireland to supply those markets. For this reason, strongly established markets, particularly some of the key European markets when it comes to meat and dairy, have been excluded from this analysis. We adopted very much a funnel approach with an initial screening of over 180 markets using macroeconomic and sector-specific criteria to assess and weight on the basis of each category. This has formed the basis of what we have now in terms of our market prioritisation tool. The output of that tool initially was to develop a list of top 30 markets for each category. And then through ongoing consultation with industry and the Department of Agriculture, Bord Bia has identified 15 potential markets for meat, dairy, prepared consumer foods, beverages and seafood. And 75 summary reports have been published for each market and sector, outlining the scale of the opportunity, the potential level of competition and any barriers likely to be faced by Irish exporters. In-depth reports are now being prepared on 5 of those 15 markets by sector, and that will outline how Bord Bia and the industry can leverage what appear to be substantial opportunities. These outputs will very much guide Bord Bia's allocation of resources in order to help us work with the industry to deliver on insights, on lead generation and in-market promotion, among other areas. As part of Bord Bia's recruitment campaign for 2018, Bord Bia is currently in the process of placing 13 additional staff in our overseas offices. The allocation of these resources was very much based on the market prioritisation exercise, and these market specialists will assist food and drink companies in market insights and planning and business development. 4 new staff will be based in Asia, in Singapore, in Tokyo and Shanghai, 4 in Europe, in London, Amsterdam, Dusseldorf and Warsaw, 2 in the United States and 1 each in Dubai, Nigeria and North Africa. To complement that, an additional 13 staff have been recruited to be based in Dublin and will very much be supporting the international office network from various functions, from insights to Origin Green to our sectors teams. A key part of our activities on an annual basis is ministerial-led trade missions, and this year they started with a livestock trade mission to Turkey in January and to the US and Canada in February, which both were led by Minister Creed. The Minister then led a trade mission to China and Hong Kong in May, and Indonesia and Malaysia just the last month. In addition, Bord Bia hosted Marketplace International in the RDS here on the 12th of April. Marketplace International was attended by 532 buyers from 52 different countries across all continents. In the days before and after the event, some 290 buyers participated on 28 bespoke itineraries, visiting 61 producers and 20 retail and food service sites. We've been actively following up on these leads to see how we can convert what are good prospects into real business opportunities for Bord Bia clients. In terms of stakeholder engagement, Bord Bia continues to play a leading role in the various Irish government and industry fora in order to provide market and consumer insight to policy makers and to prioritise support services and opportunities for Irish food and drink manufacturers. Bord Bia has held a number of meetings with Irish and UK customers to presenting the findings of the Brexit barometer and outline the preparedness of the Irish supply base. These meetings have been used as an occasion to assess the potential opportunities that can arise for Irish food and drink manufacturers post-Brexit. A series of meetings has also been held with logistics providers to better understand the challenges that may arise from the supply chain as a result of Brexit and to feed back the expectations of food and drink manufacturers on the sector. In July this year, Bord Bia launched Plan to Grow, which is a way of working more closely with individual clients to help them develop and implement their own marketing strategy. This is the first time that Bord Bia has launched a bespoke end-to-end service of this scale. This service will be central to helping us seize emerging opportunities that have arisen in emerging markets, for example in China, with the opening of the beef market there in April, while also helping client companies address the challenges being faced by their business. I hope that this overview has given the members of the committee a comprehensive overview of the challenges faced by the food and drink sector as a result of Brexit, their level of preparedness, as well as hopefully giving you an understanding of the actions being taken by Bord Bia on behalf of our client companies. Shane and I are obviously happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Brown, for a very comprehensive update on where we are at the moment. Deputy Cahill, I think, was first to indicate there.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to Pádraig for his very comprehensive presentation. And it's just what you'd expect from Bord Bia. I had the pleasure to be 6 years on the board of Bord Bia, and I think they're an organisation. They do their work very professionally and very diligently. And this report just shows that the preparedness they have are putting in place for a Brexit and the implications it can have for this country. But I suppose, unfortunately, we're dealing with a lot of variables at the moment, and we don't know what the deal will be. But from your point of view, all you can do is what you're doing, and I suppose trying to get companies prepared for the worst, the most doomsday scenario that we can imagine, which is a no-deal Brexit, and the problems that will bring to our shores. And in fairness, I think you have covered a lot. You've closed off an awful lot of you have a lot of the dangers, a lot of the pitfalls that are going to be there, and you're trying to make companies as prepared as you possibly can for it. And I suppose until hopefully we won't get into that scenario. But there's so many, I suppose, what happens when standards start to vary between the two countries. At the moment, you have rigid standards that are operable in both here and the UK, and if standards start to vary, currency fluctuations, and what the damage that would do to trade, and how difficult it would make. We saw our mushroom industry when the first talk of Brexit broke, the pressure that they come under, and currency fluctuations will be a huge issue if we go to that scenario. But there's just one issue that I don't see much focus on by anyone, and it is the fact that other countries who have significant, other EU countries who have very significant trade with the UK, what will happen when they have their displaced product as well. And you take the Dutch, they have a serious amount of trade. They have 50% more agri-food trade with the UK than what we have. And if we are in a no-deal Brexit, they're going to be out there looking for new markets as well, and they're going to be competing on the same playing field as ourselves. And it is one item of the thing that I haven't seen very much focus on from anyone. What the Dutch, the Danes, the Poles, they will all lose market share in the UK as well. And what markets are they going to focus on a post the Brexit scenario? And I suppose, we're down to 48% of our beef going into the UK now. But, realistically, if we were to get that down another 7 or 8% to 40%, that's going to be a serious job. And we've been working trying to diverse markets for a long number of years. And, the UK has been always our best market, our best paying market. And we see at the moment where the beef industry is in serious bother. We have a kilo of 40,000 head, and the returns to the primary producer are at a very low ebb. And talking about reducing, where are we going to face with that beef, or what possible markets can be got for it? We've seen live exports in the last couple of months grinding to a halt. Turkey was seen as a great white hope for this back end. And due to problems with their currency, there's no cattle going there at the moment, and again putting an awful lot of pressure on the system. You've talked there about additional staff that you have got employed, and I suppose in the last two budgets there has been extra resources put into Bord Bia. But I know probably I'm going to ask you an awkward question, Pádraig, now, but in the context of a no-deal Brexit, how much extra resources could be used by Bord Bia? Establishing markets isn't the thing that happens overnight at the flick of a switch. It's just a damn slow process. But give me 5 or 6 extra million in a budget. Is that realistic in the context of what Bord Bia would need to diversify the huge amount of products we have going into the UK? And I suppose cheddar cheese, and we'll have cheddar cheese just won't find a home, or the quantity of cheddar cheese that's going into the UK just won't find a home anywhere else. And how can we diversify that product range, and where can we go with that? And I suppose just the resources that Board B have, and you might, in your role, you might find it hard to put a finite answer on exactly how much resources could be used by Board B, successfully to try and establish new markets. And just another question, Food-wise 2025 and the targets, that have been put down there. And we have Mercosur and different trade deals been threatened on us. And even, the whole context of climate change and the real serious emphasis being put on climate change. Do you think, Pádraig, that those targets and, Food Harvest 2020, we are hitting a lot of those targets? I think people are surprised. I think with the rapid expansion, definitely on the dairy side, the way that it has exceeded even the wildest expectations. I think the rate of expansion there. But with climate change and the whole market challenges are there, do you think now that Food-wise 2025 and those targets need to be revisited, and that are those targets actually in the interest of the primary producer? And I was at a meeting last night in Mallow, and it is great with the figures we've increased our production by, but unfortunately the primary producer's income has gone the other way. And if we're going to produce all this product by 2025, is it possible to get a market for it that gives a return to the primary producer? Because at the moment that is definitely not the case.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Penrose next, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. And thanks, Pádraig, and his colleagues there in Board B. And like Deputy Cahill, I've had since the time of Aidan Cotter and many others, have always found Board B to be an excellent organisation. And thankfully we've always championed the call for additional resources, which they've always repaid in spades in relation to their efforts in the marketing areas in that regard. Market diversification, of course, is the key to all of this. I mean, this is because even if we weren't hit with the Brexit threat, I think it's incumbent upon us to be out there securing new markets in relation to different product and consumer preferences and everything else. So it would be absolutely critical to do that, and how we might be in a position to supply various markets in that regard, and the potential disruptions that are likely to take place now are something that we have to pay particular attention. And have you identified the key parameters that are associated with our production and the quality production that we engage in, and particularly our emphasis upon, hopefully people see it as a green product and grass-fed product? Is that important, or is that gaining any traction in relation to those new markets that you have been in? What the degree of penetration is likely to arise in those markets as a result of what we have on offer? Or are there improvements that we can make, or are we fooling ourselves, as well? We want to be brought to place. No use, Deputy Cahill is right, the 2025 food-wise targets they're great, and every organisation, everybody comes in here. If any of us tell us, even indicate for a moment that we should stall the horse, we're looked upon as Luddites and castigated, even non-verbally, shall we say, because the frowns says it all. But it's no use having a lot of products and produce if we don't have markets, because we have only a defined and very limited market. And you know yourself, I mean, up to 9 of every animals that we produce are exported in some shape or form. And likewise, in relation to look at cheddar cheese, we're as close to having one market as possible for our product. So those are the challenges, and but we should, well, the challenges, we should be very clear and very succinct about informing the producing public, who are the farmers of this country, that there may well be, shall we say, pitfalls up ahead, and not allow themselves to go down a road, because it's all about finding new existing markets or export markets for existing products, trying to reopen any possible markets, like some of the ones that were closed off, and that I know you're trying to work on them, but they sound potentially very attractive, but they don't have to be. And then developing new products, lines, to substitute for the loss of the market share that's going to rise in the UK. What about Sterling has again strengthened the last few weeks, well, the last week or so, but of course it's up and down. It's becoming a very oscillating currency as a result of, shall we say, events that are occurring within the British government itself in that regard. How do you see that how can we deal with that? You know, because I mean, with such a preponderance of our products lined up to go there, how do you see us getting our products to the market? Because there's a significant bridgehead, as you know, in the UK. Even if we win those other markets, how does that? I know we're opening up new ways of seafaring and getting their own ways of, rather than go through developing alternatives in that regard. But nevertheless, it's still a huge bridgehead there, and that's going to be important. And are you planning a lot of your strategies, alternative to existing strategies, are they being planned on the basis of a radical fall off the cliff or a no Brexit scenario, or are you doing the full panoply of potential outcomes to see how things can progress in that regard? And do you see next year? I know you're employing a number of other people, your graduates, and that to fulfil the roles that you require, so as to facilitate those sectors as the transit from into the post-Brexit economic environment, especially after March, if we get to that point. Although I have to say, I still have a strong feeling that in 10 years' time we'll be talking about this. I've said that in 2016, and I was only putting it up to 2026, because to me, it took Greenland 3 years to get over. It only had a few bits of agreements here and there. And here's a very large country with 60-odd million people, with thousands of agreements, all interlocked and everything else. It's going to be a long haul, and that's why I think that we'll be allocating resources to yourselves and other bodies and advisory bodies and market bodies for a long time to come. But continue your good work.
Thanks, Deputy. I will take Senator Conway Walsh now, please. Now we'll go back to Mr. Brennan.
Okay. Thank you, Cahill, and thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of questions around your partners, your British partners, say the partners of Board BIA, in terms of the role that they have. What interactions have you had with them? And I just want to ask you in terms of how many transactions have you, so say for somebody exporting, say even one single product from here, have you looked at how many transactions they might have to undergo after Brexit? And just in terms of a hard Brexit, what tariffs might you be looking at there if there isn't an agreement around the customs union? And just maybe a breakdown of the two funds you have, in particular the marketing assistance programme and the step change programme, in terms of how much of that has been spent for this year, and have you a regional breakdown of it? And what funding do you have for new businesses who might be in the process of setting up now from the Brexit funding? I have a few more questions, but maybe just to answer those in the first place. I suppose what I'm trying to get at in terms of the hard Brexit, or in terms of the people you're working with in Britain, in terms of how they, you know, like in terms of the North and the businesses there, how they have got together, both the farmers' organisation, the Ulster Farmers Union, and the other businesses, in terms of trying to persuade, I suppose, an acceptance of the agreement that's currently on the table? Or have you had any role around that? Are you doing a similar thing, I suppose, here, in terms of using your organisation as leverage to ensure that we don't have a hard Brexit? Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. I'll go back to Mr. Brennan now, and then we'll go back to the other members again.
Thank you, Chairman. Maybe first of all, I'll start with Deputy Cahill and your questions. I think it's in terms of the standards point that you raised, first of all, I think it's been very clear in all the interactions and all the discussions that we've had with customers in the UK that they have absolutely no interest to see standards slipping at any stage. Likewise, from a consumer point of view, any of the consumer work that we've done shows a strong requirement or a strong urging among consumers to retain the level of standards that are in the market. And that's the basis that I suppose we're looking at. Obviously, in terms of the final look and shape of any Brexit agreement, that is one of the areas that will be of key concern to us, because as an industry, we try and work on a level playing field at all times. And one of those key elements of that level playing field is standards. And I think in terms of the potential for any lower priced competitors to come into the UK market with what we would view to be lesser standards, shall we say, would be something that could do a lot of damage to the market. And I think at a retail and a food service level in the UK, there is that recognition as well, in terms of there is a desire not to upset the level of consumer trust that exists in the market. So I think that is really strong. The question you ask in terms of the other suppliers to the UK, and you obviously highlighted the Dutch in particular in that regard, I think the key element for us in all of this is looking at how we can diversify, looking at markets outside of Europe. And that was the whole purpose, really, of undertaking the market prioritisation exercise that we have. Because I think the last thing that any of us will want to do is, in a worst-case scenario, where there's a lot of product that previously went to the UK, we don't want it all to end up on the continent of Europe, because that would be very detrimental to everybody that would be supplying that market. So I think if you look at the global demographics, the global growth in demand for food, it's primarily been led by the Asian region and the Middle East, and to a lesser extent the North American region as well. So for us, it's all about identifying those markets with the best potential for growth in international markets terms, obviously China, obviously the rest of Southeast Asia, the Middle Eastern region and North America. And what we're doing then is putting additional people on the ground in terms of our own resources, and invested in local market expertise as well, because I think you made the point yourself, Deputy Cahill, that this can take a lot of time. So we're looking at how we can best find ways to fast track building our understanding of the markets that we're looking to diversify into, obviously through our own thinking house facility. From an insights point of view, both from a consumer and market insights point of view, we're investing heavily in these new potential markets. But on top of that, we need people on the ground, or boots on the ground, if you like, whether that's our own existing staff or additional staff or local expertise that we can get access to. So certainly that's an area we will be investing heavily in. And our view will be, in most of those markets, to successfully overcome the challenges that might be presented by a harder form of Brexit, would still leave Ireland as a relatively small supplier to a lot of those markets. For example, you look on the beef side, and I know it's not directly comparable, but China currently imports 700,000 tonnes of beef a year. That's predicted to double in the next 3 to 4 years. Likewise, from a dairy point of view, you're looking at double-digit growth in their import demand on an annual basis. So for us, it's about identifying the right niche opportunities for us in those markets, and realising, yes, we're going to have to compete with other European suppliers in a worst-case scenario. We're getting, I suppose, our credentials and seeing where we can win, if you like, in those markets. Certainly, you quite rightly highlighted the importance of the UK from a beef industry point of view. It does continue to take almost half of our beef on an annual basis. And I think in any shape of a hard Brexit, displacing that amount of product from the UK and into other markets, there's no point in saying it's going to be a really challenging situation, particularly because the UK is the highest priced beef market in the world. It's the market we probably have the longest tradition of servicing. It's the market that's closest to us, and it does tend to return better than a lot of other markets that we have. But again, I think what we will be focusing on within the continent of Europe, we've obviously made a lot of progress into the likes of Germany, the Netherlands and Italy over the last number of years, and we would hope there would be scope for some further increases there. But we would also certainly have to look to international markets to try and offset some of the real pressure. Obviously, our hope, and indeed the impression we're certainly getting from the key customers for Irish beef in the UK, is that they want to continue to source beef from Ireland. They know its quality, they know its sustainability credentials, and they want to continue that relationship that we have there. In terms of the additional staff, for us, an extra 26, 27 staff during the course of 2018 in the overall scheme of things mightn't sound overly significant, but just to put it in context from a Board B point of view, that's an increase of more than a quarter in the staff levels that we would have had up to now. So that's a significant increase in the resource, and the fact that we're investing a lot of those people on the ground in the different markets and in the different regions that we're talking about is really, really important for us. The issue on cheddar cheese and the other options that might exist, I think already you've seen from the dairy industry to some extent some level of diversification away from the UK. So we've dropped from 60% plus of our cheddar going into the UK to 52, 53%. I know from our various trade missions that the industry have been looking at markets like Japan and South Korea as options for some cheddar exports. And even in the likes of China, there is a growing demand for cheese, not necessarily cheddar as of now, but going into the food service sector in markets like China, there may be some opportunity there, but certainly it would be a big challenge. And in terms of, you asked a question about the level of resource that we could require or could need. I think what the focus we've been taking and the fact that the Department of Agriculture commissioned us, if you like, to undertake the market prioritisation exercise, I think shows the level of coordination that we have to try and identify as we proceed and as more clarity emerges in terms of the final shape of any agreement, that we're in a position to know, well, which markets seem to offer the better potential, which markets do we need to invest more in, and I suppose we'll be keeping that under review as we proceed over the next number of months. In relation to your question, Deputy Cahill, in terms of Foodwise 2025, I think the ambition of the industry to achieve €19 billion worth of food and drink exports within the next 8 years has always been an ambitious challenge, and I think it was deliberately set as an ambitious challenge for the industry. And I know ourselves from talking to various sector representatives and various companies and client companies that we have, they're certainly still determined to try and achieve that target that's there of €19 billion. I suppose what it does require, and back to your own question in terms of what it means for the primary producer, it does require for us to be really targeted in which markets and which segments of markets that we're actually trying to do business in. It also requires us to be even stronger in terms of the credentials that we offer in these markets. I think traditionally we've always sold Ireland on that clean, green, natural reputation, if you like, which is really strong, and the perception of Ireland in the international marketplace is really strong around those areas. But increasingly what we're seeing is a requirement for us to kind of quantify those claims more, to provide more data, more facts and figures to back up and to verify those claims on an ongoing basis. So, for example, in the dairy sector, through the Sustainable Dairy Assurance Scheme, through the Sustainable Beef and Lamb Assurance Scheme, providing the data that reassures and gives customers, if you like, the ammunition to build a proposition around wider sourcing Irish meat or Irish dairy products. That's something that we would be investing in. The whole area of grass-fed, we would feel it's one of our key strengths that we have. We've just completed an in-depth piece of research across 13 markets right around Europe, Asia, Middle East and North America, looking at grass-fed at both a customer level and a consumer level. And there's no doubt, but grass-fed is a motivator for both customers and consumers. If you look at globally, about half of the consumers we spoke to said grass-fed would influence their purchase decision, particularly in relation to dairy. And within Europe, that's 2/3 of the consumers that we spoke to. So there is a real, I think, opportunity for Ireland to try and own that space. But in order to own that space, we have to have a clear, quantifiable standard in place to show why it is that grass-fed makes sense for us. And I think if we can establish those sorts of positions, and it does take time, you're absolutely right, but that gives us the best opportunity then to extract the best value out of the market and ultimately, hopefully, give the best return to the primary producer. Likewise, in terms of what we're trying to do from a diversification point of view, we've now established what we call our global relationship team, in that we have a number of customers that are global multinational operators. And really what it is, up to now, we've been probably dealing with them individually in different countries. This team, Karen Cahill is heading up this team on our behalf in Board B, is to try and bring a centralised approach to how we work with these at a global HQ level. So to build the awareness and reputation of Ireland at that headquarters level, not just at an individual country by country basis. And it's all about positioning Ireland in the right way, the capabilities, the credentials that we have as a food producing country. The sterling challenge, we're all only too well aware of the challenge that has presented to the industry in the last 2.5 years at this stage. As part of the Brexit barometer, we would have been assessing, I suppose, the exchange rate at which client companies would get into severe difficulties. And if you went back to 2017, when we talked about an exchange rate in the range of a euro being equal to somewhere between 90 and 94 pence sterling, at that stage you had over 80% of companies would be in severe difficulties. A year later, that figure is 55%, so a drop, but still a worrying figure. But you have seen companies take steps in terms of currency risk management, in terms of, I suppose, efficiency and efficiency gains within their own supply chain to try and offset some of that. And certainly in terms of the currency training and the currency risk training that we do, we certainly find that as a really good way of engaging with clients on a one-to-one basis in terms of what they can do within their own individual business. But there's no point in saying anything otherwise. Sterling is and continues to be a major challenge for the industry. In terms of how to get product to other markets, that is a particular challenge if we end up with the worst case scenario. And I think one of the deputies asked about how we're preparing. We're certainly preparing on the basis of the worst case scenario and trying to get our supports and our programs in place to help companies to prepare for that worst case scenario. Obviously, like everybody around this table, we're hoping that that won't come to pass, but certainly that's the basis for how we're planning. In terms of, I suppose, the issue of getting product to other markets, there are alternative routes available. The question is in terms of the time, delays and the cost implications of that. And that could be quite significant depending on the product, and particularly if you get into shorter shelf life products, that can be a major challenge for us as well. But through our customs and supply chain services and supports, we are breaking that down for the client companies that we're working with. In terms of Senator Conway Walsh then, in terms of are we engaging with partners in the UK? And that has been something, I suppose, from the very outset. We felt that the key thing for us to do in the UK market was to really engage in maintaining and building relationships within the UK. Our first port of call was retail customers and food service customers that were long-standing as sourcing, if you like, from Ireland. And this year alone, for example, we would have had 70 meetings with retailers and food service companies in the UK.
I mean engaging in the context of opposing a hard Brexit, of using their influence similar to the organisations in the north. I would take it for granted. I know that you're very active in engaging with them on a day-to-day basis.
Apologies, Senator. Absolutely. I suppose what we're doing with them is we're sharing the results of the Brexit barometer and where Irish companies are at and the issues and challenges that are there. And then I suppose they concur with the analysis that we're undertaking and are certainly making their own representations in that regard. Likewise, we would engage strongly with the likes of the Food and Drink Federation in the UK, the likes of the AHDB in the UK, which would be kind of like a counterpart organisation to ourselves in terms of various scenario planning and engaging around that. So there's a coherence and a consistency to what they're saying in terms of we feed in our views and our thoughts into that process. Obviously, as you appreciate, as ourselves, as a semi-state agency, we can't directly, if you like, lobby on that part. In terms of the transaction piece by suppliers post-Brexit, I might ask Shane to comment on that in a minute, but in terms of the tariff, potential implications in terms of tariffs, and obviously it depends if the UK leaves the customs union, what the final shape of any trading agreement might look like. But essentially, if you take something like, say, beef, for example, which would be one of the key products we're obviously sending into the UK, you could be looking at tariff rates there from anything from 28 to 53%. So for beef, you could be looking at a 12.8% tariff and €3,000 per tonne of a duty. For cheddar cheese, it could be €1,700. These are all WTO worst case scenario tariffs that you could be looking at. Likewise, something like lamb, 12.8% tariff plus 1,700 of a duty. Obviously, there's different, if you like, tariff regimes that exist in terms of the European Economic Area, for example, would be the lower end of those tariffs, but the worst case scenario in terms of the WTO tariffs, they're the sorts of figures that I've quoted to you. And obviously, in that regard, they would have a significant and a very serious impact on our ability to supply the UK market. Likewise, any other European supplier as well.
And have you done stress tests on the companies that are exporting? I suppose what I'm asking you is, or how far down the supply chain will that go? You know, what impact, say for beef, for instance, in terms of farmers? Are they looking at a further price cut off?
Well, I think there's a couple of factors you'd have to look at there in terms of what is the UK consumer prepared to pay for some of these products in that scenario, because it would be next to impossible to see how food prices could stay at their current levels in the UK. Obviously, the first question is, what is the level of tolerance to increase consumer food prices in the UK? Now, traditionally, there hasn't been a great appetite for increasing food prices in the UK, so that will be a challenge. Likewise, I suppose what you have to consider right across the supply chain, you're looking at a really tight margin sector. So those sort of percentages, there's not that leeway in the supply chain to handle those sort of tariff implications if the WTO doomsday scenario were to emerge. So it would leave us in a really severe situation. In terms of the marketing assistance programme and the step change, this year, if I recall correctly from memory, we've paid out about £1.25 million in grants to about 50 companies through the marketing assistance programme, and step change is part of that. The bulk of that would have gone out through the marketing assistance programme. And we can certainly find a regional breakdown for you. I don't have it to hand here, but there is there's a kind of a demographic spread and a regional spread attached to that. But the total figure so far this year is about €1.25 million.
Out of how much, sir? Out of how much?
But that's our total grant package this year.
You've all spent?
Yeah, that's it. In terms of the new businesses that emerge and the supports that we provide then, Senator, I suppose the first thing I have to say on that is we would work quite closely with the local enterprise offices in terms of new businesses and supporting new businesses through that network initially. Then what we would typically tend to do is through our Food Works programme that we run with Enterprise Ireland and Teagasc is to identify a number of what we appear to see as high potential startups that we can help and really work intensively with over a period of 12 to 15 months to help them really get ready to go to market with that product. And we've had about 70 companies have gone through the FoodWorks programme in the last number of years. Obviously, as companies get up and running then, they're able to avail of the full range of board BA services as and when they're ready to avail of them. And I suppose I mentioned earlier on about our plan to grow services and working with companies much more on an individual basis. That is a new range of services that are available to companies that are, I suppose, expanding and growing strongly, or companies that have particular challenges to deal with. So again, it's sitting down with them, working with them on an individual basis to see, well, how can we help them develop and refine a marketing strategy that fits their business and how they go about implementing that. And during the implementation phase, I suppose feeding into the services that we have on offer in the different markets, whether that's on the local market here in Ireland, whether it's across Europe or further afield. So that's the kind of structure that we try and bring to that at this stage.
Thanks, Mr. Brennan. With regards, I'll get back in a second, we import quite a lot of food products from Great Britain as well. Would the same tariff imply in the event of the worst case scenario? And in the event that is the case, what's our alternative, what's our plan B in that case?
Absolutely. In a worst case scenario, that's the sort of tariffs you would be looking at imports as well. So it's a very similar to WTO scenario, which hopefully none of us will have to contemplate in reality. It would work the same for imports as it would for exports. In terms of the second part of your question, Chairman, in terms of is it supply for the local market here then? Well, obviously what we've been doing is, again, no more than we're doing in the UK, is we've been meeting all of the major retailers and food service companies here. I think in the last number of months we met 5 of the retailers here in the Irish market. And what we see from them and working with them is they're essentially trying to map out their existing supply chain. What is the source of the different products that they have on their shelves or that they're selling through their food service outlets, and looking to see, well, in various scenarios, what would the implications be for their supply chain? Would they still be able to get product? Are there alternatives available locally being produced in Ireland that could maybe replace some of those products? So while no final decisions have been made, obviously, given the situation that we're in, certainly we will be working closely with the various retailers to identify, where there might be potential for Irish suppliers in terms of opportunities. One area might be the whole area of private label, for example. In different categories, that can be a very significant part of the imported product coming in. Then in where there's existing suppliers supplying the market, if you like, there could be some further potential in the likes of ready meals and yogurts. Outside of that, in I suppose non-traditional areas that the industry will produce here, the likes of tortilla wraps and dips, they've been areas that have been identified that retailers and food service companies are quite reliant on the UK for currently. But I think really at the moment what's going on is that scenario planning, and certainly we will be feeding in, I suppose, what we believe are the capabilities of our client companies into those discussions, into that thinking. One thing that has come across very clearly from all of those meetings is that any supplier into a retailer or a food service company here will be able to show that they have the right scale to be able to supply them week in, week out, and also be able to meet their quality requirements. There are kind of I suppose, red line areas that they would have outlined to us, but we wouldn't see that as being a particular challenge. It's a matter of just being able to justify and clarify that for the various retailers and food service companies. But I think as of now, to sum it up, the scenario analysis is being done. Depending on how things evolve, obviously in the next number of months, we'll be staying very closely engaged with them. And I think that has been the core focus of ourselves, whether it's in the UK or in Ireland, that we stay part of the conversation, we stay part of the discussion with these key customers. We inform them as to the state of preparedness, if you like, of our client companies and what we're doing to assist our client companies. So we can, if you like, continue to be in that discussion and feed in the relevant intelligence and insight as required and as appropriate.
And the event, we're only, 4 months away from Doomsday, April Fool's Day 2019. Yeah, in the event that the worst case scenario does arrive, are we on target to achieve all we hope to achieve? Are we ready basically for that particular day? Well, in the event that it does come?
I think we're as ready as anyone can be as an organisation. I think the industry, some of the figures you've seen coming through the barometer, there's been a lot of progress made in the last 12 months. I think, in all honesty, there would be further progress to be made between now and the end of March next year. But I think the building blocks are there. It's just to take what is now nearly, I won't say a hypothetical situation, but scenarios, and saying, right, if that scenario looks like it's going to happen, what buttons do we actually need to press? What things do we need to implement to be ready to go live? I think the structure is there. It's just investing that time. Absolutely, would it be challenging? Of course, it would be massively challenging if we got to that point.
Okay. Senator Daly is next, please. I'll let you back in. I'll let you back in a second round. Senator Daly.
Answer the question. Sorry, on transactions.
Sorry, Senator.
No, sorry.
No problem at all. No, I'm Senator. I can come in and answer some of those remaining questions. I think the key point here as well in terms of this end date of March 29th is that the barometer results that we presented today is a snapshot in time in terms of preparedness from March 2017 to March 2018. If we were to do that again today, I think you'd see even more progress again because of the services and programs that we've rolled out.
Just trying to get a measure on the documentation
exactly.
And the transactions. That's
exactly.
all. And I think, take up anyone's time.
Absolutely, Senator. And I think that's where you would see a lot of that progress taking place. So the customs training that we've launched in Board BIA and the supply chain workshops that we've launched are addressing those issues. So what are the additional administrative processes and the complexities that are emerging here? And what are the costs associated with those processes? And what are the potential time delays associated with those? So what we've seen is that the level of familiarity with a majority of Board BIA clients around those documents wasn't there up until recently. So we're looking at what does it take to fill out a SAD document, a customs declaration, an export declaration. If you are going to fill it out, who's going to help you with that? What customs agent will you work with? How much does that customs agent charge your business? So we're looking at, and obviously there's a market out there in terms of customs assistance. You could be looking at anything from €25 to help you with a SAD document to €50, depending on who you're asking. We're also looking at then, as I say, the veterinary inspections that are associated with that. So customs will deal with one group of officials, then you have your SPS and veterinary checks as well when you land in the UK. What are the costs associated with those? Now that's a complex methodology depending on the type of product you're moving, how big your consignment is and so on. There's no back of the envelope figure for that one. But as clarity emerges on the UK side in terms of how they intend to calculate that, we'll be filtering that through as well to the client base. And then we look at the delays that this could entail. So you could, again, it's anecdotal. You could be looking at 2-hour delay you could be looking at a day's delay, depending on whether it's a documentary check or if it's a physical check. And if the physical check is your consignment at the back of the truck or the front of the truck. So these are very practical considerations that come into play. But the important thing, I think, is that we are equipping Board Bia's clients to understand these implications, to forecast the costs that are associated with those, and then to understand the potential delays. And what we try to remind the clients as well through this training is that, you know, even in the softest Brexit scenario, things will change. So your supply chain is going to become more expensive. But that just-in-time delivery, this just-in-time supply chain that we operate in, isn't actually about speed, it's about predictability. So we're trying to help them understand what are the potential obstacles that they may face going forward. And if they can forecast those and predict those, well, then they're better equipped to manage them.
I know, and I think you've answered it sufficiently. It's just Revenue did tell us several months ago in the Finance Committee that it could be up to 100 pieces of documentation for each item, and that would be serious. That would have serious repercussions for what we're talking about here. Thank you, Cahill. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Senator Daly.
Thanks, Chair. Thank Pádraig and Shane again. It's a very comprehensive document that supplied us with, and as we all know, and we've all said here on numerous occasions, like, it's a moving target. So, you know, you can only plan for the worst and hope for the best, as is what has been said. So, I've a few questions based on the currency has been mentioned a lot, and currency to me is possibly going to be the key determiner of how this is going to work out for us. Let it be good, bad or indifferent Brexit, it will be how the markets read it. And we're very vulnerable, anyone who's supplying to the UK, which was seen, as Deputy Cahill has mentioned, with the mushroom suppliers. And at the time of the referendum, and when the sterling nosedived and our mushroom suppliers were tied into fixed term annual or biannual contracts on sterling prices, there was very little sympathy from their customers. It was, well, you have a contract, live with it. How are you seeing relationships between companies here and their customers over with regard to what might happen? You know, and following that a little bit further down the line, like, I would assume at this stage we've almost 2 years waiting for the end of March next year. So I presume any company here who is supplying into the UK would not have a fixed contract based on a sterling price beyond next March. It would be, you know, it'd be prudent if I was a businessman too. The last contract I wrote up, I'd write it till March till we see what happens. But with that in mind, could Irish companies inadvertently find themselves in no man's land on the 1st of April, even if we have a soft Brexit? You know, are there a lot of contracts due to expire, which would be the prudent thing to do under the circumstances? But if we've a lot of people coming out of contract on the 1st of April, and even if we have a soft Brexit, could Irish companies find themselves inadvertently in a no man's land? The other thing we keep hearing at the moment is about stockpiling. There's a lot of stockpiling supposedly going on in the UK of non-perishables. And would you have noticed any of our suppliers and the non-perishable sector that are, whose sales would have the graph would have risen dramatically, and it's possibly because their produce is being stockpiled over, and then even if we have a soft Brexit, you can only sell a product once. Could they find themselves in a dip mid-2019 because what has been stockpiled is being used? And I'd also just like to know how solid, or what kind of contracts, when you go on your trade missions and you do a trade deal, how solid are our trade deals around the world? Because Deputy Cahill again mentioned previously about displacement of product in other EU countries, and if they go scouring the world like you have been doing so successfully, how rock solid are the deals that we have, and in particular I suppose maybe the relatively new ones where we wouldn't have a good foothold or an established market? And finally, Chair, just Brexit aside, I'd like just to hear your views on where we are with Foodwise 2025 with regard to the targets and the markets. How in sync are they? If the production, if the 19 billion is reached in sales, are the primary producers going to be able to reach that target, or are you going to be able to keep in sync with the increased production? If you know what I mean. Are the targets and the markets in sync, basically, and will they be in 2025 if the targets are achieved? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator. Deputy Corcoran Kennedy, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Brennan and Mr. Hamill, for coming in to us here this afternoon. And I must say it's heartening when you see the various initiatives that have been put in place in relation to the Brexit barometer, the supply chain logistics guide and the logistics partner database, along with the market prioritisation exercise and the plan to grow, that there is a tremendous effort being made to try and assist our producers in the awful scenario that's facing us. I was interested in maybe posing a couple of questions to you based on your presentation. I note that you're talking about how exports rose to the UK, and but also while it was driven by meat and dairy, that seafood was down. Could you account for how is it that the seafood exports are down in that market? Also, in relation to the barometer and recommendations and Brexit plan, there is a template that is in place there, and I was wondering, how are you monitoring the uptake of the companies who are using that template to help ready themselves? The other question I had is in relation to the market diversification and the 15 priority markets that you've identified, and I was wondering what markets are they in fact? I also note that you have new staff going into various cities across the world, and I see that there's one going into Nigeria and one into North Africa, and I'm wondering what are the products that you're planning that might be suitable for those markets. And in relation to the plan to grow and working with specific clients, I was just wondering how you've identified the clients that are actually availing of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. And Senator Marcella, please.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to raise with you the issue of the unsustainable prices being received by beef farmers and how that impacts on your work and, of course, our Foodwise 2025 targets. And in particular, in recent weeks, we see that the price that farmers are getting in the factory per kilo is down about 30 cents from €4.05 last year to €3.75 now, and I believe in the last week it's gone down approximately 5 cents. And despite us being told there are not cartels and there's no evidence of cartel, this is it's similar pricing in all the factories throughout the country. Clearly this is unsustainable when we see Teagasc saying it takes about €800 a year to keep a suckler cow, and they're getting €700 for a weanling when they go to the factory. I suppose there's a glut of cattle at the moment. We saw last week a record of about 40,000 animals killed in the factories. But how long can this go on if farmers are losing money? Like, they're going to go to the wall. And while I know this is an issue for the factories, Chair, you and the Minister are abroad creating markets and doing it very successfully, and they're benefiting from this. And I'm just asking, what is going to be done to bring pressure to bear on these factories in relation to this issue? And I also want to ask you, are you participating in the Beef Forum, and where is the Beef Forum at? And how are the factories being challenged by you? Because if we don't have beef farmers, if we don't have suckler farmers, there's not going to be any beef abroad to be sold. And I'm just very concerned about this. And also in the context, which I know it's all in the mix because it's all impacting on farmers, but the national herd and the size of the national herd has constantly been challenged, especially in the climate change debate. And here we see farmers struggling. And I'd like to see a lot more done for these farmers, or we won't have a future beef industry, or we'll have a very diminished beef industry, and they'll just, fall away because, like we've said here so many times, it's not attractive for young farmers when they have so many other options than going into an enterprise where they're losing money. And it's consistently happening and it's not getting better. So I just want to know what you're doing, what pressure you're bringing to bear, and, the factories need to be called to account, and not just people being directed sent in the direction of the competition authority. But you're helping the factories. So quid pro quo. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Mr. Brennan. Sorry, Deputy Pringle, do you want to contribute? Okay. Mr. Brennan.
Thanks, Chairman. Maybe if I could start with Senator Daly. Thank you for your questions. You're absolutely right in relation to the currency and the exposure that we have there and the level of exposure. If you look at different sectors that we have, obviously half our meat is going to the UK, 65% nearly of our prepared consumer foods, etc., over half our cheddar cheese. It has been and continues to be a major challenge for the industry, as we said before. In terms of what we've seen in the UK market and the realisation that suppliers into the UK are facing that currency pressure, certainly we have seen in the last 2 years in terms of that relationship between the suppliers and indeed their UK customers. I think there has been a recognition more so than previously in terms of the pressure that suppliers are facing going into the UK market. Now obviously we've gone through a period in the UK over the last year and a half where there was food price inflation for the first time in a number of years in the UK. That certainly resulted in higher prices being paid to the retailers, and our understanding is that did reflect itself back in some of the contracts, if you like, that were being signed. In terms of the potential come the end of March next year in terms of contracts going beyond that period or closing off at that particular date, our understanding is that there's some customers in the UK that are inserting a breakout clause into the contracts that they have with their Irish suppliers in terms of the contract and how it operates. Now that's not to say that business will be lost, but it's recognising the reality that there could be a very significant change at the end of March next year, and it's allowing for that, if you like, reopening of that contract if and when that were to happen. So we have certainly seen some of that emerging in the last, I suppose, 6 months in particular. So you can look at that both ways, but I think in terms of at least there's a realisation that there could be a potential need to review contracts that exists. In terms of stockpiling, certainly any of the trade data that we were looking at wouldn't suggest any significant level of stockpiling to date in the UK. Now obviously it is shelf life dependent, and as you made that reference yourself in terms of some products being more suitable for stockpiling than others, our view and our information at this stage is you wouldn't expect a major level of stockpiling in the next while, but obviously it is something that we'd have to keep under review on an ongoing basis because, as you quite rightly point out, it could have a knock-on consequence on the level of trade as we go through 2019. In terms of the trade deals in new and emerging markets that have been coming through over the last number of years, I suppose the key thing that's always the focus in terms of the ministerial-led trade missions is the level of access that we have to these markets in terms of the detail, if you like, of the access that we have around specifications, age, bone-in, boneless product on the meat side, etc. So it is always and continues to be, I know from our colleagues in the Department of Agriculture, a focus of getting the broadest level of access that we can possibly get. And at least then you have more options within the market in terms of what type of product you can supply into different customers in that market. I think in terms of the deals that are done, typically they will tend to be at a commercial level, supplier to customer point of view. So like any commercial arrangement like that, it's up to that individual arrangement, if you like, rather than being a long-term agreement in place. But I think the key thing for us on all of that is in these markets where there is a growing import requirement, there's a deficit in terms of the amount of food that they have to produce locally versus what they need to import, no more than the UK itself. I think the onus is on us as a sector, and obviously Board BIA as a key part of that in terms of making it clear as to why Ireland should be the source of the product rather than elsewhere. And what are the credentials and what are the quality, health, natural credentials that we have that make us stand out as a supplier into those markets. Each market will always be competitive in nature. I don't think there's any market out there that isn't competitive. So we have to be as strong as we can possibly be in terms of how we position ourselves in those markets. In terms of the food-wise targets and that, certainly, are we on track or are we in sync, if you like? I think if you were to look at where we are currently, in terms of the growth that we've seen in exports of food and drink products over recent years, and you're to extrapolate that out to 2025, we are on target just about, I would have thought, to meet those. But back to the point I think was raised by Deputy Cahill even earlier on, in terms of the sink, and coming to Senator Mulhern later on, in terms of the sink at primary producer level as well. I think the challenge is, and again it comes back to how we position ourselves in these markets, and is where do we get the value from those? What is the return we can get from different markets for different products that we produce? And that's the biggest challenge, and it's the biggest challenge for us as the marketing and promotion agency for food and drink, is where can we find those opportunities? And obviously some of those take time to secure and to develop your position. And I think that is something where everything we do, it's about saying, well, where can we position the Irish food and drink product in that market at a particular time to get the best return? And sometimes you just have to get into a market to establish yourselves, and then over time gradually work your way up at the level or the return you can get from that market. So certainly that's the emphasis we have in terms of our role, if you like, in trying to ensure the maximum return from the marketplace. Deputy Kennedy, you had questions obviously in relation to seafood and why we were down to the UK. I think there's a couple of things at play there for me. I think first of all, if you look at the market distribution of Irish seafood, we have seen a significant change in that over the last number of years. You've seen the likes of the Asian region in particular emerging really strongly for products that traditionally may have gone to the UK or different parts of continental Europe. So I think it's more a reflection of other markets elsewhere, maybe giving a better return rather than the UK, rather than any fundamental issue in the UK market itself. You quite rightly asked the question about the Brexit barometer and the template, and are we tracking to see are companies using the template? And certainly what we do in terms of the team that I'm involved in, if you like, is a sectoral team. We would have regular meetings with our client companies part of that, and part of our engagement with them at those meetings now is to assess where they are in terms of their preparation when it comes to Brexit, and we literally walk them through the likes of the template and other supports that we have to make sure that they're as prepared as it can possibly be. And then obviously Shane, through the various workshops and training programs that we have, is encouraging more companies to take part. And indeed, I should have referenced earlier on, all of our training programs and workshops are actually oversubscribed at the moment. And now we will be continuing to run those programs and workshops until such time as the demand isn't there anymore. But I think it gives you a good indication of how tuned in and the emphasis, if you like, that's being placed on getting ready by our client companies at this stage. In terms of the market prioritisation, I suppose the one thing I'd say on that is we looked at 5 different categories. We looked at meat, dairy, prepared consumer foods, seafood and beverages. And there's a different 15 markets have been identified for each. The one thing I should say on the meat and dairy side is we deliberately excluded many of the European markets from the top 15. Not because they're not a priority for us, they absolutely are core markets for us, but they're also markets that in most cases we're well established in. So we focused on looking at potential new markets. So in that case, if you look at meat, for example, of the 15, 8 of them are in Asia. In dairy, 7 of them are in Asia. Seafood, 7 of them in Asia. There's a number of Middle Eastern countries, the likes of UAE, will be in there quite strongly for a number of the categories. North America, in terms of US and Canada. Mexico is emerging strongly across a number of the categories. But then when you look at something like prepared consumer foods, where the industry has traditionally been really strong in the UK, you will see within that 15, there's 7 continental European markets in that list of 15. So it varies a little bit depending on the category that you're looking at. You asked the question then in terms of the new staff in Nigeria and North Africa. In Nigeria, and the person going into Nigeria will be covering the West Africa region in general. The primary focus there will be dairy, followed by seafood. Quite a significant region for seafood exports as well. In terms of North Africa, we're looking again dairy, potential on the livestock side, and to a lesser extent on the meat side. So they're the areas that we'll be looking at in terms of those new staff going into those regions. Finally then, in terms of the plan to grow services, which clients are they available to? Essentially, any company that's engaging with us and working with us to develop their commercial marketing strategy can avail of the plan to grow services. Obviously, some services will be more appropriate for different clients than others, but they're certainly available to any client company to avail of those. Senator Mulhern, then, you went very hard on us all together. But it is a very serious issue. I know myself, I'm from Kilkenny and I live on a beef farm myself, so I know exactly the challenges that you're talking about. We are in a period of really difficult beef pricing and have been for some time now. There's no doubt when you look at the profitability figures that you quite rightly pointed out that Teagasc and others have been releasing and publishing over the last while, that we have a major challenge in terms of viability at farm level. It is a serious challenge for us, and it is something that in terms of what Bord Bia is trying to do, at its simplest, what we're trying to do in relation to beef is find the best customers in the best markets to buy as much Irish beef as they can possibly do. I think that's reflected in the fact that if you look at where Irish cattle prices are relative to European cattle prices, I think, and I stand to be corrected now on this figure, on a year-to-date basis this year, we're in around 105% of the European average price for cattle. We are below the UK price, but that is by far and away the highest price that we've seen. And I suppose when you look at the UK cattle prices, virtually all of their beef stays within the UK market. Half of our beef goes to the UK, half goes outside of the UK to other European markets and elsewhere. So the challenge has been to get a return from the marketplace, because we have seen, particularly in the last 6 or 9 months, an increase in supplies across the continent of Europe. That has had a detrimental effect on demand for beef in general, and that has put pressure on prices. It is something that I think it highlights the challenge for the industry to probably look towards new markets more so than ever before, to create that competition in terms of the product that we do produce, to have as many markets as we can possibly have available to us in terms of willing to buy different cuts of beef from Ireland to maximise the return that we can get. Is it an easy issue to solve? It's absolutely not easy. And in terms of Bord Bia's own role in this, obviously in terms of marketing and promotion of Irish beef in different markets, the onus is on us, and it continues to be on us in terms of what is the story or the proposition that we can sell and establish around Irish beef in those different markets. The fact that we go into every market as an import supplier, and typically there is a preference for locally produced product, that puts us at a disadvantage from the get-go. And obviously what we try and do then is find a niche or the part of the market where we feel we can establish ourselves and get the maximum value for. We can't achieve that in every single market, but certainly that's the ambition that we have, and that's what we work towards. And again, it's back, I suppose, in many ways for us is, what are the unique credentials? What are the things that Irish beef is different? How do we stand out? And selling those as strongly as we can. I know, and I have neighbours and a brother myself who would like the price to be much better than it is currently. But certainly that is the focus of what we're trying to do. I think we're in a European beef market where prices can be volatile and have been under pressure for a period of time. And I suppose really what we're trying to do is find the best return we can to, if you like, to get the best return we can from the investments that we're making in promotional activities.
Mr. Brennan, like we could have quite an extensive conversation on this, but I asked you how the meat factories have been challenged by authorities here. Just on the side that you're getting them a lot of business, they're very profitable, and the person who in the food supply chain, the primary producer, the farmer, is not even breaking even, and that, as you said, that speaks to viability or non-viability. So what are you doing? Because I know you're selling abroad,
yes,
but in fact, if you have nothing to sell, you're going to be defunct. So how are they being challenged?
And I think it's in nobody's interest that we don't have cattle to supply to produce the beef, because from a processing industry point of view, obviously they require the animals to process the beef in the first place. So I think what we've been certainly trying to do through, and certainly as part of the market prioritisation work we've been doing in terms of identifying with the industry, to say, well, which markets do you feel are priority that we can grow the value of business from? So that's our role. Our role is marketing and promotion. Our role is seeing where can we, or where should we be investing, and we need guidance in terms of whether it's at a processor level or customer level, see where are the opportunities for us to grow. And certainly from our point of view, the higher the return we can get from the marketplace, the more justification we can say, well, what we're doing is working.
But when you're talking with the processors who are seeking to sell abroad, do you not turn around and say to them, well, how about giving the farmers a fair price? You know, I don't think you're answering the question. I know it's a difficult question because it's not an easy one to solve. But these factories are all powerful, and the farmer is a farmer by himself. And the beef forum is up in the air at the moment. The prices are depressed, and you know the prospect isn't good. So you are, in effect, they're not paying you to do this. The beef factories, the meat factories, the processors. The taxpayer is paying you, and the state agencies. So can we not ask something of these that, you know, as I understand it, for the same animal, the same carcass in the UK, they'll get €200 more. Now, I understand that they can have a preference for locally produced beef, but I think there's a mutuality there. Like and that fact that the prices across the board are uniform with the processors. Why is that not being challenged by ye?
Sorry for putting the question there for a minute. And you're right, we could have a long conversation about this. You're 100% right.
But answer the question.
Yeah, no, we're slightly off agenda, if I'm saying so. We're slightly off.
All the rest is academic.
Oh no, but we're slightly off agenda. And,
yes, Chairman.
Yeah, and we could have a long conversation, and maybe we should.
Well, if he answers the question,
maybe we should have a long.
Move on.
Maybe we should have a long conversation in another meeting with the processors.
Yeah.
I think they have a part to play maybe in this as well. I think Mr. Brennan pointed out his role or their role or Board B's role, I suppose, in promotion. I suppose the question that maybe you asked that he didn't answer yet is, are you involved in the beef forum?
I'd say, Chairman, you should be in niche industry Ireland, because in fairness to Board B, that's a promotional body. They're not involved in setting price, and they don't sell beef. I think meat industry Ireland should be brought in here to answer the question, as Senator Mulhern was put.
Yeah, and we have, in the next number of weeks, as outlined at the beginning of the meeting, we have a discussion on the suckler. The report was published by the IFA as regards to suckler farmers and beef industry, so going forward. So that may be where we can tie in that. But maybe if we could wrap up and.
Chairman, I propose we bring them all in. We can bring in Board B then as well.
Yeah, that'll be for another day.
I second.
Yes.
No problem. Yeah, we'll have that on the agenda for it's a discussion in its own right.
I think just to close off on that, I think we challenge ourselves, first of all, Senator, in terms of what we do within Board B to see are we delivering the best value for money that we can through our own activities. And certainly we'd be only too happy to be part of any broader discussion that would take place on that matter. In terms of the beef forum specifically, are we participating? We have been participating in the beef forum from the very outset and continue to participate in that beef forum. Our role is very much to be, I suppose, the market voice in the beef forum and in discussions that take place. And in terms of what are the trends, what are the dynamics that we're seeing in the market, what are we seeing in terms of changes in the market, and what do we feel as an industry are really important points that we need to be considering and agreeing on a strategy for. So that's the one and only role that we have in the beef forum, and we've been doing that since its very foundation a number of years ago.
Chair, my specific point was this, like the last meeting was, I think, around the time of the budget, and there was a bit of disarray around that meeting. So when is the next meeting, and where is the forum at? Where is it at as regards having all the stakeholders at the table? When is your...
As I say, we attended the last meeting, and you're absolutely right, it was budget week now that I recall it. We attended that meeting. We are awaiting the date of the next meeting. We typically get informed a month or 6 weeks out of the potential date of that forum, and we'll be awaiting that date.
This day week we have the Minister before our committee. We can ask that question maybe at that. I'm sure you will, Senator.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, members, happy enough with questions? Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Brennan and Mr. Hamilton, for appearing before the committee today. This is not the last we're going to hear of Brexit, I'm sure, but I will put your point of view. You know, we 2 years ago now, I think it's probably 2 years ago, we published a report, and you were before, I think yourselves reported, you were before, Mr. Brennan was definitely before our committee before in this matter, and we published a report at that time. We decided that we would have an updated version as we move on, because times have changed and are continuously changing. So you're part of this process, so we hope to produce this report now before Christmas. And we all obviously hope that we don't have to go to doomsday scenario on April Fool's Day next year. So, you know, thank you very much for your very comprehensive presentation and questioning here today. So, without any further, we'll just suspend briefly until we get the next group in. Thanks again for your contribution. We're in session 2. I'd like to welcome from Horse Sport Alliance, Mr. Barry O'Connor, the Chairman, Mr. Greg Broderick, Mr. Gerard O'Neill, members, Mr. Jim Power, economist. Thank you for coming before the committee today to discuss the report of unlocking the economic potential of Irish sport horse industry with the committee here today. Just before we begin, I want to bring to your attention witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence given to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in respect to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed to only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings to be given. You are asked to respect parliamentary capacity effective where possible. You should not criticise or make charge against any person or entity by name in such ways that make him or her identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary capacity effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charge against either person outside the House or an official leader by name in such ways to make him or her identifiable. Mr. Conor, I understand you will make an opening statement, please. When you're ready.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, deputies, for your invitation to make our presentation. We appreciate your time and your interest. I'm going to do a summary, if that's okay, of my opening statement due to time constraints. I'm sure everybody wants to get on with their evening. My name is Barry O'Connor. I'm a producer, a seller, a trainer of show jumping horses. I'm based in Malahide in County Dublin. I have a stable of 20 horses at the moment and 8 staff. I mentor young riders. I've lectured at NUI Maynooth occasionally. I run training programmes for Teagasc Young Breeders and the Show Jumping Association of Ireland. With me today are Greg Broderick from Tipperary. He's an Olympian, a breeder and producer of horses. We have Gerard O'Neill from Kilkenny. He's also a breeder and producer of horses. He produced and rode 2 of the gold medal winners at the World Championships for young horses in Lanark and in Belgium recently. And I have Jim Power, economist, who I think is well known to the members of this committee. The Sports Horse Alliance is a voluntary body. It's a group made up of a group of businesses and individuals and sporting bodies that are directly involved in the sports horse industry in Ireland. The sports horse is anything other than a thoroughbred. It is driven mainly by the eventing and show jumping and dressage, mainly by the Olympic disciplines. That's where the most economic activity is in, the professional economic activity. Our group represents 3,000 jobs because our group members are breeders, producers, trainers, owners, vets, blacksmiths, feed companies, equipment companies. We have most of the major companies in Ireland are members and contributors to our alliance. Our goal is to sustain and increase the jobs, exports and inward investment in the sector and to grow it. We believe the potential is there at the moment to double our output in jobs, in exports and in inward investments. We are not here to look for any types of subsidies, price supports or tax breaks. We are not here to look for anything like that. We will look after the price of our product. We just want investment from the Department of Agriculture. We're here to present, of course, our report. And when we came together as a body 2 years ago, we had found that there was numerous reports on our industry. I think 4 or 5 over the last 15 years, but none of them had definitive information on the contribution of the horse sport sector, the sport horse sector, or indeed its potential. So we commissioned Jim Power to do an economic report on our industry, which is in front of you here at the moment, and he'll elaborate on that in a minute. And his remit was to inform public policy makers of the economic footprint of the sector and identify measures that can be taken to unlock the potential of it. The standout items in the report is that this industry is worth 816 million to the Exchequer, and it's 14,000 plus jobs. Those figures, we didn't make them up. They come from a UCD report, which was independently commissioned. It's not from any sporting body, it's not from any breeding body, or not from us. It's independent of our group altogether. One of the other standout items on the report is that each horse spend is average €7,000 a year to the local economy. So any horse that's involved in any type of sports horse activity, the spend through vets, blacksmiths, feed, forage, bedding, subscriptions, travel, equipment and training, that is an average of 7,000. So on the UCD report as well, they say that there's 20,000 active sports horses in Ireland. So that is 140 million into the rural economy. That's outside the M50 in all the rural constituencies, from Dingle to Derry, from Dingle to Donegal, all around the country. In my stable alone, and I'm based in County Dublin, my feed comes from Kilkenny, my bedding comes from Ballina, my vet is from Kildare, my blacksmith is from Meath. I do shows around the country, and my hay and any straw that I use comes from County Carlow. Our spend goes right around the country to every village and every rural area within Ireland. This is there's a lot of good news in our sector. We're not here to complain and whine, but in the last 18 months, in the sport alone, we are the European senior gold medal winners, what happened in Sweden. At the World Championships in Atlanta in America this year, we are the silver team medal eventers. We had an individual silver there. We are the gold medal individual winners at the under-14 and the under-18 in Fontainebleau in France, one of them riding Ger O'Neill's horses. We are second in the world breeding statistics for eventing horses. So our island produces the second best eventing horses for export all around the world. We won 3 medals this year at the World Breeding Championships in Lanark and in Belgium for young horses. And this is against all the other breeds everywhere who are way stronger than us in numbers, in investment-wise and in numbers-wise. We asked in our report, we envisaged that we would need 100 million over the next 5 years investment to sustain our levels of employment and to double it and to increase our worth to the exchequer. But as a group of business people, we realise the realities in budgetary allocations across a series of competing demands. I've watched a few of the reviews of people coming in here doing presentations, and I know everybody's looking for money at the same time. With Brexit as well, that will have a serious effect on the lower end of our market, because England take about 40% of our exports, and it's the movement of horses that is worrying for us. Because any slowdown in the movement of horses, that's really where a lot of the expense comes, and that's if the product is easier to get in Europe, they will do that instead. So we asked for 100 million ourselves as a group over the next over 5 years. That's the figures we did to the Jim Power report, and the Horse Sport Ireland themselves, they put in a submission to the government for the budget for 13 million, and they wanted to spend that over the 4 new departments: high performance sports, sports and recreation, breeding and production, coaching, education and training. Unfortunately, at the budget we got an extra 500,000, which brings us to 3 million annual investment from the annual funding from the Department of Agriculture, and that is completely inadequate. I don't actually know. I don't know where people think that we can sustain 14,000 jobs, where we can grow the economy at all. I can't see the thinking behind it at all, and that's one of the asks that we have here. If our potential is to be realised, it is critical that a realistic multi-annual funding is established, that we are not coming back every year wondering what we're going to do next year, what programs we can open, what programs we can sustain, what we can do over the next couple of years. We have to realise we have to make realistic multi-annual funding programs. We have written to Minister Creed to ask him to establish a high-level group to identify and secure sustainable funding streams for our sector. But without such an initiative, the sector will have a high level of ambition but absolutely no growth. With your permission, Chairman, I would like to maybe let the other members give a brief synopsis of what they do.
Okay, no problem.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Greg Broderick. My stable is based in Thurles in County Tipperary. Basically, I'm an international show jumper. I spend probably more than half my time in Ireland, half my time in Europe at international shows, mainly because of the, unfortunately, the lack of facilities to compete at and the lack of international shows in Ireland. Just to make a statistic, when I was in under 21s in Young Riders in Athens, there was five riders on the under 21 team and 5 on the under 18 team. And unfortunately, from those 10 riders, I'm the only one that's left with the business in Ireland. All the others have set up in Europe and in America, England, in Europe, mainland Europe and America. Mainly due to the fact that the facilities in Ireland are just not up to scratch, and it's very hard to produce horses to a top level. So, like I said, it's a very upsetting statistic to think that all my colleagues, when I was in Young Riders, that they've all had to move away. I have, in total, I've 18 full-time staff in my stable. We have 17 horses riding out, or we have 70 horses riding out every day. 18 full-time staff and 5 or 6 part-time. We breed up to about 40 foals a year. We've about 250 horses on the farm, and like Barry, all our investment is in Ireland: hay, straw, feed, farriers, everything is in Ireland. And I love to be based at home in Ireland, but unfortunately, unless things improve here and unless the facilities, I'm definitely not asking, as Barry said, for subsidies. I'm happy to drive my own business forward and to look after that side of things. But when we're putting such an amount of young horses on the ground, bar we have better shows, better prize money, and better, most importantly, better facilities around the country to bring our horses to produce them. Unfortunately, I see myself in the next 3 years closing my operation in Ireland and moving to Europe, the same as all the other guys that I grew up with. So.
My name is Ger O'Neill. I'm a director at Castlefield Sport Horses. It's a business that I've started myself in the last 7 or 8 years through challenging enough times. We've been lucky enough to win a couple of gold medals at the World Championships, and my rider has just won gold medal at the European Championships this year. A bit the same as Greg. We're trying to push forward and improve our horses here, and like some of our expensive horses can be up to like €1 million. And the facilities that we have to ride on here are actually somewhat not safe for our horses that we want to compete at. So for the last 6 weeks then, I based some of my horses in Belgium. They've very good facilities there, and they're really up to date and up to speed at what we're trying to do. I have a young family in Ireland, and you would be hoping not to have to move, but like we have 10 of the top 100 riders in the world, and I think only 1 of them are based in Ireland now at the minute. So I would obviously love to try and stay here, but at the minute it's not actually viable for us to do it and be at a very high level. So we're just looking for you really to try and improve the facilities and maybe just take an eye at the sector, like what we are doing, how much it is worth to the economy. We kind of feel like that we're just being laughed off a bit. Like the race industry is very, very good, and the greyhound sectors, but we're like the poor relation, and we really want to be taken seriously. We're serious people, and we're very committed to what we do. There's great people in Ireland, great love for the horses, but we don't really feel like we're getting much back from it at the minute.
Okay. Jim, do you want to make a contribution? I'm sure you didn't come in for the...
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, Deputies. Yeah, I just want to, I suppose, briefly summarise the report I did there for you. I spent a couple of years doing this report. I interviewed a lot of stakeholders in it at all levels, from the top-end professional to the lower end in terms of activities. And you know, it's a very broad and very diverse sector. The sport horse is obviously at the centre of it all. Barry threw out some of the statistics there. There are 14,830 active breeders in the country at the moment. There's over 46,000 people engaged in the industry. There's over 14,000 full-time equivalent employees in the industry. It makes an economic contribution of 816 million, and it has an export value of 48 million. And all of that is achieved with support of around 3 million from the state. And if you put that in the context of the thoroughbred sector, makes an economic contribution of 1.84 billion and gets around 65 million in funding. So I suppose the question I would ask is, if you provided anything remotely like that sort of funding to the sport horse sector, what sort of potential could you achieve? The issues that I kept coming up against as I did the research, lack of support structures, the lack of a strategic plan. The industry has traditionally been very fragmented, and that was reflected definitely in the whole structure and board of Horse Sport Ireland. Thankfully, that issue has now been addressed, and there's a much tighter, much more focused board in place. I think that's good. The general funding for the industry, and particularly in the area of prize money, is very, very weak. The tourism potential of the sector is not recognised, and is certainly not being exploited. As previous speakers have mentioned, many of our top breeders and riders are being forced to leave the country, which, in my view, is a huge loss of a very, very talented bunch of people. The facilities are just not up to scratch, and issues around maintaining the quality of the breeding stock. So basically, I think what is needed, there has to be significant investment in the infrastructure and the facilities to try and bring up the level of competition. There has to be a strong focus on education, knowledge transfer, and I think a key part of this is to try and create a career for young people in the horse sport area, not just an activity they do in their spare time, but make a professional career out of it. There needs to be a strong focus on the whole breeding framework, and I think very importantly there needs to be a much higher level, a higher standard of competition available for Irish riders and Irish breeders, because if we don't have top quality competitions, you will not have the top quality people participating here, and we will continue to see that brain drain. As part of my research, I visited the Netherlands, and I looked at some facilities there, particularly a place called Pielbergen, which is covered in the report. But a couple of things struck me about that. Number one was the level of professionalism. Number two, the quality of the infrastructure in place. And number three, and I think this was incredibly important, the local authority actually was a key funder of that equestrian centre, because it recognised the economic and tourism potential that that centre brought to a rural area of the Netherlands. So in terms of, I would, in my experience, it is very much up there as top best in class, and I think it really is the sort of utopian vision of what the Irish industry can become. So I looked at the potential then, and I'm not sure if this is a forecast or if it's a target, but I think if the correct structures are put in place, you could certainly increase the economic contribution by at least 50% very easily, create an extra 700 jobs, and you could certainly double the export potential from 48 million to close to 100 million. So finally, I would say 2 points that stand out in my view. One is that the sport horse industry is an incredibly important contributor to rural economic activity. It makes a very strong rural economic contribution, and I think very importantly it makes a very strong social contribution. It's a key part of many communities. And I think the final point, and I think this is really crucial, Ireland has an incredibly strong reputation for the horse, and I think we need to mind it, we need to nurture it, and I think we're going the wrong way about doing that at the moment. And if we continue to go in the direction we're going, there is one half of the whole horse tradition of Ireland going to be wiped out, and I think that would be a huge pity.
Okay. Can I ask a question as a group? I think Jim mentioned the fact that we're not attracting competitions. I presume that is because of the infrastructure we have.
Yes. Yeah.
And can you give us an idea of the type of infrastructure there at the moment, and what would be required to bring it up to a standard that would attract competition?
Maybe I'd give this to Greg Broderick. you maybe explain how many horses you had abroad and why you went abroad, and then say
Or, as well, first of all, what type of competition? What are obviously Dublin Horse Show is obviously, I presume, the biggest competition we have at the moment.
Yes.
What else have we?
We have, I think it's 5 international events in the season altogether. In 52 weeks, we have Mill Street, which is a 2-star international. The stars of the show defines basically the prize money on offer. 5-star being the biggest, which is Dublin Horse Show. 1-star being the smallest. So we have a 2-star in Mullingar, a 2-star in Balmoral. We have a 2-star in Mill Street. We have a 5-star in Dublin, and we have a 1-star in Cavan in November. So there's basically 5 shows in the year where you can ride at an international level. Then when you see things like your world ranking, you can only win world ranking points in competitions that are £1.45 and above, and the classes have to be worth 25,000 plus. So basically, to win world ranking points in Ireland at a horse show, you have 1 ranking class in Mill Street, 1 in Mullingar, 1 in Balmoral, none in Cavan because it's 1-star, and there's some classes in Dublin because it's 5-star. So basically, to base yourself in Ireland and to keep yourself in the world rankings is basically impossible. It's very, very difficult to do. So definitely, it's something we need to look at, to have better show centres with better surfaces, because the price of horses nowadays that are competing at that level is, it's up to a very high standard, and the last thing you want to do is to be jumping your horses on poor surfaces, because if you have people investing in you and in horses to ride at that level, the last thing you want to be doing is jeopardising them jumping in facilities and surfaces that aren't up to scratch. That's the basics. And unfortunately, as silly as it may sound, the facilities and surfaces are way behind in 95% of the show centres around the country. So earlier in the year, in January, I went to the Sunshine Tour in Spain to produce some of my older horses, but also some of the young horses. I actually brought 37 horses to the show in Spain, which is a massive operation to move there. I would certainly have said that I would gladly have left 20 of those horses at home to compete with some of my staff and riders in Ireland if there was better facilities and better surfaces to produce them on. But unfortunately there wasn't. I'm just home from Villamora in Portugal, where I went. We had 22 horses at the show in Portugal. We were gone altogether 6 weeks. And again, I would say that more than half, I would say 14 to 15 of those horses I would gladly have left at home to do some of the shows in Ireland. Obviously it costs me, it's an awful lot more expense to put them on the truck and bring them that far. But unfortunately the shows and the availability to good shows with good surfaces to produce the standard of horses that I'm trying to keep in Ireland is just not up to scratch. So I'm being forced to go to Europe with the horses. So like I say, and as well as that, when I've brought the horses there, you have customers, people there that are at those shows because they're nice facilities, people that are agents that are trying to find horses, or dealers that have clients looking for horses. They'll go to those nice show centres to find horses, and unfortunately there's not enough of those shows in Ireland for people to bring clients like that, so they're opting more for Europe and for some of those sunshine tours like Portugal and Spain.
Yeah, and finally, before I can bring in Deputy Cahill, the 100 million that you reference, I think is that the 100 million in reference, is that the figure that is required to bring these facilities up to 5-star?
All monies would go through one body, which is Horse Sport Ireland, and that has been restructured, as Jim pointed out earlier. And all money would be directed into one body, which would distribute it like the HRI. So, and that has 4 sections of training, competition, breeding and education, and infrastructure grants. So that was the money. 20 million is what we envisaged that it would take to resource Horse Sport Ireland and have infrastructure grants.
So what kind of figure would you reckon that it would cost to bring those venues that you mentioned, Mill Street, which I personally thought would have been one of the top class facilities in the country, Mullingar, Cavan, to bring it up to a level of Dublin, would say.
We are talking about 30 million over the next 5 years, spread out between the top 5 centres and then to a lesser level the feeder centres underneath them as well.
Okay.
They'd all have to be identified, and you know, it's not to say that if we got money in the morning we would give them directly. There has to be a process and a transparent process of how you would fund
Absolutely,
it.
yeah. But I would imagine that the Mill
Yeah.
Streets and so on and Mullingar's would have to come up to a standard
Yes.
that would attract, obviously, foreign competitors and so on and so forth.
Well, Mill Street and Mullingar attract foreign competitors at the moment, but prize money, like the business model for racing, is what mostly they would need at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Deputy Cahill?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to ask a number of questions there. Gentlemen, thanks for your presentation. It raised, I think, an awful lot of issues. I think a lot of issues that we need to address here. Just sports, horse sport Ireland, and just, you know, I was given this by Dara O'Brien this morning. I think we met you a couple of months ago and you presented to us. But it's a limited company. And I just wonder, I would like you to explain the structure. What was the reason, like Bornagon and HRI are semi-state bodies, and why was there a departure from that for Horse Sport Ireland? And like, you've been set up as a voluntary group, and like, in fairness to you, you're not prescribing yourself as being in opposition to Horse Sport Ireland, but are you just there? Like, I suppose the question I'm asking is, how come it isn't Horse Sport Ireland are sitting in front of us today making these points? Like, they are the governing body, they are the ruling body for the industry. And, you know, what was the, and I'm not questioning your bona fides now, Mr. O'Connor, but I'd just like to get to the heart of the issue. You have a Sport Horse Alliance, which you say is a voluntary group, and I fully accept that. Greg is a neighbour of mine, and I know his facilities well. He's a superb training establishment there just beside Thurles, and it's a credit to the Broderick family. And just then, you know, the public perception would be that our show jumping teams are starting to do a lot better internationally. And that would be the perception. We went through a trough there that, you know, we've seen we weren't able to compete at the highest level. My perception would be now that we are being successful. See, I read somewhere there where a large number of jockeys riders had ridden internationally for Ireland last year. And, you know, more so wanted like to be 5 or 6 per team when you go to a show. But it was a multiple of that had ridden internationally. And obviously they all have their own horses. How many of those horses are Irish bred, or are they being, you know, there was a time when virtually every horse that was being ridden in a show that was being ridden by an Irish rider was Irish bred. Like, what percentage, you know, are sourced here? And obviously, you know, that's just now. You didn't mention eventing too much in your presentation, and are the same eventing and you know the markets for eventing horses? Like, have they the same issues as yourselves as regards show jumping? Like, you know, we'd see the trials in badminton and other places, and we'd see non-Irish competitors there. And I think an Irish team has competed very successfully internationally there and eventing there recently. So are the same problems there with eventing as regards the structure and the prize money and being able to compete at international level and the breeding of the horses as well? And then, I suppose, to go back to funding and to the hub of the issue, you know, Horse Racing Ireland and Bornagon, there's a 4-to-1 split in what the government gives at, and you have a graph here in this brochure that was given to us. Horse Industry Ireland 64 million, Greyhound Industry 16 million, and Sport Horse Sector 3.96 million. Now, I suppose both of those industries would make the point that they have a betting tax that generates income for the exchequer and income for the state, and they make their argument that that's why they're getting this money back into their industry, and that is self-financing. Now, obviously, you haven't got that vehicle to do that. So, is it that? Are you looking, say, to make that, you know, a split in that 80-20 split? Is that what you're saying, that you want some of that for Horse Sport Ireland, that you want to get in and make that a 3-way split now rather than a 2-way split? So I suppose, like, the figures you give as regards the amount of people that's employed and the generating of income and the potential of the industry, I think there's absolutely no one can argue with what you're saying. But I suppose, you know, the other two industries would defend their position very vigorously. And is that where you're saying that you want to try and source the income to promote your industry? And like the chairman there has asked questions, like the Dublin Horse Show, you know, is a world-renowned event, and you know we all go and enjoy our day out, and probably it is the only day most of us will go to a show jumping event. But will you attract? You know, you have a European circuit and you know a world circuit, and Greg has said that he was in Portugal there the last 6 weeks. Will you be able to attract the top flight riders here if you have these 4 or 5 top events in the year? Like, you know, we talk in the racing sector, we have our Leopardstowns and we have our Punchestown where, you know, we have grade 1 races and, you know, they will be targeted. And even at that, and I suppose is our success in the racing front, we don't have too many horses coming across the water to run in Irish races, no matter how valuable they are, because I suppose we've become so successful here that they were able to go over and win 17 races in Cheltenham. There's not much point in they trying to come and win races here in Punchestown. But will you attract the top flight riders here, you know, when they have their own circuit on the European circuit? So, you know, I fully appreciate the way you're trying to promote your industry, but I just like if we could flesh out some of the things I have to say that we might be able to get, that we might be able to put a structure in place to try and see can we get agreement on a way forward.
Senator Michelle Ballhorn, I'd like to get all the questions first. Is that okay? Senator.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to welcome the witnesses, and firstly just to say I'm delighted that you're taking this initiative and that you commissioned this report, because I think what Mr Power said there to me captured maybe a challenge that you have, which is that the industry is fragmented, but also it's fragmented in the view of people, therefore the general public, and the value that it brings. I suppose I could say I'm from a part of the country where it's all around, but to join up what it takes to do it, the cost, you know, what it's delivering to local economy and all the, no more than some types of other farming, beef farming, whatever, it's not immediately obvious. So I think this is a very worthwhile exercise, and I can see great potential because in many ways I also get that there's a labour of love involved in when you're in sports, dealing with sports horses, and that's very evident, as I say, in my part of the country. So this is a good start. I suppose, Chairman, you asked questions I think were very pertinent, and they've, I suppose, explained some of what you're asking for in relation to the upgrade of facilities, which currently you're saying they're really substandard and pose a challenge to you and the well-being of your horses when they compete there. So as I understand, you're talking about education and training, you're talking about upgrading facilities. But when you're talking about prize money, are you saying that you will get money from the state to provide prize money for competitions? And is that how they do it in the Netherlands? Is that the sort of model you're talking about that you need to see to attract international show jumpers? And I suppose on the education and training side, I'm just trying to understand how much interface you have with the current systems, like apprenticeships. Like, there's a big debate about apprenticeships now. Like, are your apprenticeships formally recognised by the department, and are you supported? And, you know, I suppose, or is this work that has to be done to try and flesh out all of these things? And I suppose in relation to, I mean, how many show centres, you named the top 5, but how many show centres are around the country? And, you know, where would the closest one, say, be in the West at the moment? Or is your plan really just focusing on strategic regional centres to develop, or would it be more widespread? And in relation to your alliance, you've given us the figures of people who are involved in your industry. How many are involved in the alliance? Or, you know, how many people have you actually, you know, subscribing to what you're doing here in an active way? I'm sure they'd all welcome it, but, you know, how many of you are actually coming together and giving you sort of a mandate to say, you know, go for it here, and supporting what you're doing, which obviously spills out on the ground to politicians? Because if I'm hearing it, I'm going somewhere, well, this is what we need, this is our industry, that you're all saying the same thing, that in a certain area, like it's Mayo, and I go out and I go to a horse show or whatever, and people are saying, do you know that this is what we need? Like, is that cohesion there? Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Daly, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and welcome to witness again. Just a few very brief questions, really. A lot of what I had in mind has been covered, but I'd like to know, what's the corporate buy-in to all of this? Is there any potential, if you had the money in the morning, like for matching funding from a corporate side, or where do you? I know while it's not specifically a requirement of state funding, but you'll never get a handout unless you have some form of matching funding. So where would you see, the balance of what you need, even if you got what you're looking for, any additional or supplementary expenditure? How could you see that being generated from what input the government would be making if your request was to be met? Or, like as Deputy Cahill has said previously, from their horse racing, and I don't want to start comparing, and you quite rightly said that in your presentation, but the horse racing side do have betting tax, they do have the tote, to have what I'm calling matching funding. What potential do you see there, that if you got the infrastructure that you so much deserve and desire, what other additional income could it create over and above what it's creating at the moment? And maybe from your experience, I suppose, in particular, Greg, but all four of you, I suppose, the fact that you've done the study and you're ensconced in the industry, how is it funded in other countries? I'd be a passive. We're talking. I think we're talking show jumping here predominantly. I'd be passive, as in when the Aggie Canna be on or whatever. But the countries that participate there, Brazil, USA, Canada, the Dutch, the Germans, what kind of a model are they working off, or what state funding are they getting? I'd also like to, I'm into the horse breeding and the thoroughbred side of things. How is this inadequacy in funds affecting our breeding and our name? Like, we're a world leader in breeding of horses across the board. From what I'm hearing here today, can't be helping the cause. And how can you see us turning that back to where we'd like to be as a breeding nation? As I say, we'll be talking mainly show jump, but you're representing all sport horse. Does that also include the harness racing, or are they more the thoroughbred side, or are they in between somewhere? Because we've had the harness racing people in here before, again looking for a piece of the pie. Would you be working together, or are they under your umbrella, or I know they're not under the HRI umbrella? Are they a third entity? Is another question I'd have. And I had one more there now, and I can't remember it, but it might come back to me by your answer.
Okay.
I think we've got
Deputy Corcoran, Kenny, then I'll come back to you, Mr. O'Connor, right?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to you all for coming in this afternoon to bring us some very interesting information and provide maybe more detail than we would ordinarily have. And I'm from West Offaly myself. I was brought up in a little village called Belmont, and there was horse breeding going on there, so I was very aware of the potential that the sector has. Indeed, Derek Henney is from that area and is doing very well internationally. Can I just, and now might as well stay with the local, there's also a fantastic entrepreneur called Emma Rose Conroy. I don't know if you've come across her around Tullamore in the Eurostallions service that she's providing. So, I mean, it's fantastic to see all of this happening. But it's concerning, obviously, to hear you say that there's, I suppose it's, the information was so disparate, and that we weren't able to focus really and see how much information there is there. So you've done a great service in terms of producing this report. Can I just ask you if you have, if this report has gone to Horse Sport Ireland, have you actually given it to them so that they would, it would be no doubt of something of assistance to them in terms of sharing that kind of information? And, you know, who do you see as the driver in terms of investment in additional facilities? You know, you outlined the various places that show jumping takes place. You know, who would actually drive that, or who would be spending that funding if it's provided? The fact that there's such a disparity in relation to the funding that
is going to yourselves and Horse Racing Ireland and Board Nagan and Horse Sport Ireland. Like, how can you can you identify why there is such a disparity there, considering that we all take such pride in the successes of yourselves? And what kind of relationship do you have, say, with what's the name of the body that is involved in the Olympics? Olympic Ireland, is it? Yeah. You know, for example, in terms of developing elite athletes, you know, is there a relationship there that there would be funding, say if there's somebody particularly identified as potentially a gold medal winner in the Olympics, is there any kind of a special funding stream to help them reach their potential? And oh yes, you were talking about the type of facilities that are in Belgium. Who was it? I think it might have been you, Mr. Broderick. You know, if you had a magic wand and you were to say you wanted something created here, you know, what would it be that you would see here? Would it be one amazing facility, or would it be several facilities across the country?
Chair.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, go ahead. I'm intrigued too to know how far down your own food chain you go as regards to the pony clubs and that. You know, from progression of young riders. Like, would you go, how much involvement or input, or if you had the money, how much of it would you intend putting into the development of young riders in particular, I suppose, which will start with ponies and work their way up? A friend of mine one time said that he had a daughter and she was into ponies. He said, but a pony's only a stopgap for between toys and boys. But what plan would you have to bring her beyond the boys and keep her interested in the pony and move on to the horse? Thanks. Thanks. And I have a question as well. The property, who owns the venues that you mentioned there, the Mill Street, the Mullingar, the Cavan, wherever else, those venues, 5 venues you mentioned, but obviously you know who owns the RDS. But who are the others? Private?
Privately.
Okay.
All private.
Okay, Mr. O'Connor, you ready?
If I may start with a couple of the questions. You asked, there's a couple of questions about Horse Sport Ireland. When we initiated our contact with the Minister and the Department, the first job of work the Minister said he had to do was to look at the structure of Horse Sport Ireland, to bring it more into date, to modernise it as a body. And we liaised with Indicon about the restructuring of Horse Sport Ireland, about making it more fit for purpose, making it more transparent for any government payments that might be made into it. With that said, now the Minister appoints 3 seats on the board and the chairperson, and he's responsible for signing off on the hiring of the CEO. We work together with Horse Sport Ireland. We liaise with them all the time. We're all involved in different training programs with them, so we're not in any way split for them, or we're not in any ways against them. No rivalry whatsoever. But before they were reorganised, we came together as a group to put together an economic mandate, which was missing from the sports horse industry for years. It's our fault as well. We're not here to try and find ministers or governments or departments to put blame on. It was our fault as well. We didn't get together. We've got organised. Our industry is organised. Our structure is right up to date, and we put in, and Horse Sport Ireland put in an ask themselves for funding for 13.1 million. To start their education, their breeding, their prize money, their infrastructure programs, and we got an extra 500,000. We were into 3 million. As I said, I don't know what we can do with that. Getting into the asking, is it feasible, or have we a want to be in the Racehorse and Greyhound Fund? It's not up to where the Minister gets the money from. That's up to him. But we wouldn't want to be seen to be taking money from bodies that have already established that. Getting into that fund isn't one of our goals, but we do need money from somewhere. That is up to the Minister. That's a question from him. On a relevant point there, we're trying to emulate what the racehorse industry has done. It is an unbelievable product, and I don't think, as Irish people, we're proud enough of it. We hear stories about it, that so-and-so is worth so much and they win this money, and there's 3 main owners. They're only problems that will last for a couple of seasons, and then it'll be something else. It is one of the best products. As 3 show jumpers, we are immensely proud of what HRI and the Department of Agriculture have done with racing in Ireland. It is incredible. We're abroad. People ask us about it. We are an island of Europe, and we have the best trainer in the world and the best racehorse in the world, and some of the leading studs in the world. It's something that we're trying to emulate, and something we're very, very proud of. As you're asking about, the Minister was adamant to us and the civil servants at our meetings that they're going to pay one person, and one person will distribute all the funds, and that's Horse Sport Ireland. So in any funding streams will come from then, and I think that's very important, because we need to tie in the high performance sport with the breeding, with the centres, with the pony club, with all the stats and the databases. It should be in one place. It's not big enough to have separate bodies. It should all be in one place, and that's why we support all funding going through to Horse Sport Ireland, coming from there. You asked about the Irish breds and the eventers, and I'd like to give that to Ger O'Neill, if that's possible, because he'd be more qualified to talk about that. You asked, have they got the same problems that show jumpers have, and does prize money and facilities, investment in that, would that bring a return to the economy?
I also evented myself up to World Cup level, and I think the events around the country, they are a little bit different structure. They maybe don't need the same facilities we do, because a lot of their events are on grass. But the prize fund definitely needs to be up for them. We can now see for the first time Irish riders have won on Irish horses and won medals. They're at a very high level. We've been exporting a lot of our best horses around the world, and for I think 19 years we've been #1 in eventing. So they definitely need more money, the same as the show jumpers. But prize fund is probably something that they could do with a lot more, as much as facilities.
Okay.
The other point I was asked about, if we had the prize money facilities in the morning, would international riders come? So I'd like to probably give that to Greg Broderick, who has a number of international clients with him at the moment for our training.
Yeah, I would say that you would, of course, get more international riders coming to Ireland if the prize money was better. But more importantly, what I could emphasise is that if the facilities are improved and the surfaces are improved, we can produce our horses to a higher standard, which is what we're lacking at the minute. And if we can do that, obviously the horses are worth more money. It just brings it raises the bar with everything. It raises the bar with the production, the standard of riding, when you have the better facilities available. And it's a domino effect. What I noticed when I finished in Villamora 10 days ago, and I spent 8 days in Holland, Belgium, Germany, France, looking for some new horses. And what I noticed was, when I went into some of the very good breeding stables, was that they're actually working with a lot of international riders. You go to try and buy some of the best bred horses off them, they don't actually want to sell them to you, because they're happy to keep them, and they're working alongside some of the Belgium or the French international riders, and they're saying, I'm going to send that horse to him when it's old enough, and it's going to be produced. And there's a network of very good show facilities around them, close to them, within striking distance, 2 to 3 hours. They can do an awful lot of their work, because there's been a lot of investment, and a lot of the international riders are basing themselves around that infrastructure, because they can train very well, and then they're working alongside the breeders. So when the international riders are taking on the horses, obviously the better riders are basing themselves there. They can produce the horses to a higher standard. So when you have a lot of the foreign customers coming in from the likes of the Middle East or America, Canada, to buy horses, they don't want horses that aren't produced well. They want horses that are well ridden, well produced, and the facilities are there for them to do it. And then those horses are being sold for a lot of money, and the money is trickling down the line to the breeders, and they're able to invest in better mares. They're able to use better stallions, to pay better stud fees, because as the horses are being well produced to a higher standard, everything is raising the bar of everything, so they're able to use a better type of mare, use a better type of stallion on their mare, and to hold tough and give the horses to international riders. Unfortunately, the problem that we have in Ireland is that the facilities aren't here, we don't have an availability to better prize money, so the riders that you see winning gold medals in the Europeans, in ponies and juniors, and like what I said when I was under 21, all those riders are leaving Ireland, so they're in Europe and America, and they're producing the horses to a higher standard over there. So there's a bit of a breakdown between the breeders and those international riders, which is definitely affecting the business. If we had better facilities and better prize money in Ireland, you'd keep a better standard of rider, they'd be able to produce the horses to a better standard, and it would have a domino effect without any question down along the line.
Can I ask you, Greg, prize money has come up here fairly regularly. Who provides the prize money at the moment, and what's your typical prize money? For example, your main event in Mill Street or your main event in Mullingar. What kind of prize money are you talking about? Or how does that compare to your similar event in Holland or Belgium?
The Grand Prix at those two-star shows which we spoke about, which would be Mullingar, Balmoral and Mill Street, would be a prize fund just for the Grand Prix of 25,000. I competed in some two-star shows in Portugal over the last number of weeks, and when I spoke about a ranking class for 25,000, in Portugal there was actually three, throughout the week from Thursday to Sunday, there was three 25,000 euro classes at the same typical type of two-star show, whereas in Ireland you just get one bite of the cherry, there's one 25,000 euro class. So it just shows, but I actually asked in Portugal how it's funded, and they said that the tourism board do help a lot, and the government help a lot providing with the prize money, because it brings a lot of riders to ride at the show, and then you have all the spin-offs around the area.
Who provides the prize money here presently?
It comes from show organisers.
Sponsorship, basically, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, asked was there any corporate buy-in? That was one of the questions. I would see any grants for infrastructure grants, I would see it on a 50-50 basis. Prize funds that we do it the same way the racing would do, that you would have to come up with a percentage of it yourself. I'm going to get Jim in a second to talk about that. You asked about apprenticeship schemes. We don't actually have apprenticeship schemes at the moment. We have Chagas run some different colleges run some programs, but we don't have a cohesive training program. We have a very good training program for the riding skills. But if a young breeder wants if a farmer wants to diversify their income on a small holding, that there is no actual business. There's no business course that they can do, even like the way they do the green cert to inherit farms. We don't have any of that type of education that we have in all different areas of agriculture. Maybe Jim would be the best. Power would be the best to answer where else the government have used public funds for infrastructure grants that have to private individuals that have trickled down into the local economy.
Okay, I suppose it's important to point out when we're comparing ourselves in an international context, Ireland does have obvious geographical disadvantages. You know, it costs more to transport horses here, whereas in the European circuit, Belgium, Holland, Germany, France, it's all, you know, it's easy enough to get around and it's relatively cheap. So that does place us at a disadvantage. So that means really we have to run a lot faster to try and catch up, or to stay up with the others. And we're not doing it as I see it. We're slipping back. So that's why I think if you accept there is a potential for this industry to make a significantly greater contribution, which from a rural economic development point of view I think is very important. I do think where you get that sort of market failure, the state would be justified in intervening. And if you look at other areas, by providing, I think the facilities actually is the most important thing, because if you create the correct facilities, you will get the top riders here. And I was going to use the the analogy of the horse before the cart would probably be inappropriate. But you would, if you're running top competitions on top quality facilities, I think you will get top quality riders, and that will then feed into the generation of the revenues that will fund the prize money. So I think the facilities and creating top quality competition is very, very important. Where has the state intervened in similar areas? Well, if you look at the activities of the IDA, and the investment the IDA has in the facilities that they basically provide to multinationals to create employment, it's the same sort of structure. You facilitate businesses that will generate economic activity, that will generate employment, that will generate tax revenues.
Okay.
Chairman, just ask about the breeding of the horses that are jumping internationally, and why was it set up as a limited company, Horse Sport Ireland, rather than a semi-state body?
Mr. Chairman, I don't speak for Horse Sport Ireland, and I think they will do a presentation, or their new chairperson will be doing a presentation, Mr. Joe Reynolds. So that would be more appropriate for him to ask that question. We have meandered with our purpose for years. I've never heard a minister, a department official, or a head of any administrative body talk about jobs and exports. Never. I've never heard them speak about it. And it's interesting because I did some research I watched some old tapes of people doing presentations here, and most people have those figures. We are a very old industry, but we've done it ourselves as individuals. But it's time for us to come together and harness it for the good of the exchequer, for the good of all people that are involved in it. We've talked about the high end of sport here and the international show jumpers and high end prize money. But all high-performance sport encourages local activity. It encourages people to get involved. It encourages participation. And if you are granting money to a centre, that there is a tie-in that you do. In Holland, when the local authority gave money to the local centre, they had to employ local people. They had to give jobs locally, these part-time jobs when they have events on locally. There was a buy-in from the centre to the local area, and from the local area into the centre. And I think that would be very, very important going forward.
Chairman, just pertinent to Mr. Power's response, have you looked at a possible funding stream under the Rural Development Programme?
I haven't, no.
Okay.
If I can just, we've heard this a few times. We've heard, why don't you ask the Department of Sport? Why don't you ask this department? And this is a bit of a problem. It's like passing the ball, passing the parcel.
Yeah, but the Rural Development Involvement is under agriculture, of course.
Yeah, but
Cap forum.
We have okay, sorry. As a body, it should all go to the one place. So when we're talking high performance, we're thinking, how can we get jobs and exports? Every euro that you give to us, every euro the department gives to the Horse Sport Ireland should be converted into inward investment, jobs and exports, for nothing else. It's not for people's enjoyment. It's to create, it's the multiplier effect for the good of the exchequer.
That's actually part of the objective of the Rural Development Programme, to develop alternatives outside conventional farming, so it would match what you're trying to do, and it is co-funded by the government and Europe.
You may have it.
Sorry, Senator, I misinterpreted your question. I thought you said the World Development Programme.
No, the Rural Development Programme.
Yeah, Rural Development, I beg your pardon. Yes, I did look at it, and it's an absolute, it would definitely be a fit, there's no doubt about it, because it does generate, it diversifies the whole rural economy and adds value, there's no doubt about that.
Because,
when you look at the discussion we've just had about beef prices in the last session, okay, for example, the pressure on beef farmers, you look at what's happening on the tillage side, there is need for rural diversification, there's no doubt about that, and many small farms out there, could generate meaningful economic entities in this area.
Okay, good.
Just a couple of questions I had there, I didn't hear any answers.
We're getting to Deputy Corcoran Kennedy. I'll be back in a minute, Senator, all right?
I just wanted one of these big centres in the west, that's all. Nobody told me that was part of the plan.
We'll go over parochial now today. The Deputy Corcoran Kennedy's questions. The driver of additional facilities, I think, was the first question.
And also whether this report has gone to Horse Sport Ireland. The other question...
The Olympic Council of Ireland.
Pardon me?
The Olympic Council of Ireland.
I mentioned the Olympic Council of Ireland in relation to the identification of potential elite jumpers, and also if there was an ideal facility, where might it be and what would it be like?
Mr. Connor?
The Horse Sport Ireland, yes, they have we have used a lot of their figures and in this report. So we have sent it there. I think that was one of your questions. Yes, we liaise with them all the time. The Olympic Council of Ireland, yes, Horse Sport Ireland. I think the Department of Sport gives some funding to Horse Sport Ireland for, I think it's called podium funding, which is basically for championships, World Games, Olympics. So they actually work with them, but on a purely results basis, to gain results on international sport. As I said before, the chairperson of Horse Sport Ireland will be able to make a better presentation on
and the Olympic Council of Ireland identify Greg Broderick, for example, as an elite athlete, and prioritise him or her, whoever the case may be going forward, for extra facilities or extra funding, extra training, as in like the boxers, we say, for example. There's a number of boxers obviously are in high in special training and all the rest, and get a bit of, I suppose, extra facilities and extra funding, and as indeed some of the athletes. Are the show jumpers, would say, for example, not treated in the same way?
I don't think so. Yeah, go ahead.
I would say I haven't heard of it before from the Olympic Council towards show jumpers. There is initiatives within our own within Horse Sport Ireland where there is obviously training days and
we've had some success, obviously, as you know, over the years.
Yeah.
Just in relation to the disparity between the funding of Horse Sport Ireland and Horse Racing Ireland, it's quite significant. You know, Horse Sport Ireland is getting 2.5 million and it's going up to 3 million. But to contrast that then with the Horse Racing Ireland at over 67 million, Bordegan nearly 17 million.
Yes.
How do we account for that huge disparity? Do you know? Jim, have you looked at that? Has anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I have, and I remember being asked a question on a radio show many years ago about the preferential tax treatment for the thoroughbred sector, and I, for once, said I cannot answer that question because I don't know the answer. So I went away and did a lot of work on it, and I looked at Coolmore, and I grew up in the neighbouring county to Coolmore, was just across the river, and Coolmore is just an incredible contributor to a local economy in South Tipperary. It's amazing. You know, it's world class, and what it does for the local economy, paying premium prices to farmers for hay and straw and stuff like that, it makes a huge contribution. So the point, so you know, I suppose the advantage that the greyhound sector and the thoroughbred sector have is that they're very narrow, well-defined sectors that have always had a very united voice. Okay, they've worked together. It's one small, you know, very narrowly defined industry in both cases. Whereas the sport horse sector, you know, it consists of everything from a small equestrian centre in a rural village in Waterford to what we see in the RDS in August and everything in between. And that's the problem. There was never, I think, a united approach or a united voice. And I worked very closely with Horse Sport Ireland in the compilation of this report. I talked a lot through them throughout the whole process, and I'd be very surprised if HSI had a problem with anything that's in this report. Okay, so you know, I think we're all on board, and there's a much more united approach now, and the restructuring of HSI's board I think is a major step in the right direction. So I would hope that with a stronger voice and a much more united approach, hopefully the sport horse sector would be able to go some way towards emulating the world-class industry we have in the thoroughbred sector. I think that should be the sort of utopian vision we have for the horse sport sector. At least that's from an external perspective looking in.
And just in relation to the facility, I mean, are you thinking in terms of something brand new or just investing in the existing ones that are there already, the different arenas? You know, like they're outlined here.
We discussed this earlier today, and before we came in, we're talking about refurbishing places that are there at the moment. You can ask economically why. You can ask economically why haven't we done that? Horse Sport Ireland was set up, I think, 10 or 12 years ago with the promise of funding, and then along came the big crash, and there was no funding available, etc. We had a lot of people move out of the industry because of it, get jobs abroad. We missed a step. It's a chicken and egg situation, and we have to get in front of it. We have to get in front of it. And I would refurbish a lot of the places that are there, and maybe some new buildings. But these people have, the people that we've identified have a track record of through a recession running an equestrian centre. And these are the type of people that you need to carry it on for another 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, and the reason I'm on about that is because, you know, I'm just thinking about the Sports Capital Grant Fund that, you know, was allocated over the last number of years, and there's been, you know, say regional, large funds allocated for various regional facilities, and it just potentially strikes me that maybe that could have been a good.
Yeah, we can't access it.
You can't.
No, because privately owned centres. Yeah, public owned property.
Well, I wouldn't go along with that now. I'd question that now because
it's being questioned by a lot of people more persuasive than me. Yeah.
Let's check into the small print now.
It has to be public owned property.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
I beg to differ, but we won't go into it.
Senator Daly, you had a question.
Chairman, I asked if you have any relationship with the harness racing, or are you under the one umbrella or there? Because we've had the reason I'm asking the question is we've had the Irish Harness Racing Group here as well, again looking for seed funding also, and pretty similar presentation, to be honest.
Yes.
So you don't have any relationship, they don't come under your umbrella.
I've talked to the head of that body, but no, they're a member of Horse Sport Ireland, but they're not a member of our group. They have it's really a separate asset they have. To be honest, I find it odd that they're with Horse Sport Ireland. I thought they should be in sort of maybe in a betting structure like Horse Racing Ireland or something like that. It's odd that they're actually with Horse Sport Ireland.
You've had some communication with them, though?
Some communication.
I've had
a couple of phone calls.
I'm thinking on my feet here. You wouldn't see the merits, and maybe, as I said, you've both been here now giving similar presentations, both looking for seed funding. There wouldn't be any potentially in a joint venture. Yeah. They're looking to get it to buy a track.
Yeah.
Could there be the potential for a state-of-the-art jumping arena in the centre of the track if you were to put your heads together?
Well, to be honest, you should never say no, but we already have 5. To answer it truthfully to you, I don't see it. You know, I don't see the two different types of breeds of horses. Two different.
I can appreciate that,
yeah,
but at the same time, they're still horses, and we've talked already about the thoroughbred, and we're talking about the sport horse, and now they're a third wing.
Yeah, well, we want to refurbish what we have, because I think it's very important to stay with the people and the companies that they have that run the equestrian centres, because they have a proven track record. There's been a few investments in past years where they went on to new people that had a new idea, and it never worked. But the centres that are there at the moment that we've identified have a fairly good business skills to take on the funding, know what the market needs, invest properly, spend the money properly, and sustain it for over the next 10 to 20 years.
No, I appreciate that totally, because I was actually thinking to myself here at the outset when you were giving your figures.
Yes.
I was saying, if you're doing that well, you're shooting yourself in the foot almost. Yeah. Why do you need money? You know, so it has been well run, and I can see why you would. I'm being a little bit sarcastic. I can see why you would need the money.
Yes.
But like, it's a credit to everybody involved to have got to the level of figures that Jim has highlighted without the type of funding you have been getting. But I do think, by virtue of the fact that there's private ownership in there, and there's no greenfield site even mentioned.
No,
you could have difficulties, and Jim might answer it better. Difficulty getting around some of them issues, the private ownership in particular?
Yeah, I think structures would obviously have to be agreed before any state funding.
As I said, Mr. Chairman, there's 2 points on that. The first thing is we're talking about prize money and infrastructure, but there's a lot of other areas that need funding. You know, in breeder education, young people that want to come into the sport. To give put a business sort of a school on that as well, grooms, stable staff, all that educational training databases. There's a big spend on that. It's not just all about, you know, prize money and infrastructure, and I think it's very important to.
As you said a few minutes ago, Mr. O'Connor, that would be crucial. The infrastructure will be crucial to attract competition to the country. I think Jim Power said the same.
It's our first part, but to follow that up, there's also a spend needed in the areas of education and training.
Okay.
Mr. O'Connor, like I said there earlier, there's a large number of riders that jumped internationally last year.
Yes.
And I think I would say upwards up to about 20 probably jumped internationally for us on various teams.
Oh, there's 26 or 27 that have jumped to Nations Cups. There's probably about in there. I'm only talking show jumping, of course, because that's our area. But there's probably 40. I'd say 40.
How many are Irish based? Like that's our biggest.
Oh, Irish based.
But I'm just saying in general.
A handful of Irish based.
We have very few.
Handful.
Yeah.
So you're probably talking about. Say you said jump Nations Cup, you said 27, 28.
Yes.
So you're talking about those riders probably have 2 or 3 international horses each.
Yes.
How many of those are Irish bred?
So what are we talking? Let's call it.
It's roughly 60, 70 horses.
10.
10.
Yeah.
I think that really puts why we need to invest in this industry into focus.
Yes.
Because there was a day when every Irish rider would be riding an Irish bred horse.
Yep.
No, I'm not criticising those because they go where they can source the top class horse, but it shows where we have slipped, really, doesn't it?
It really does. And activity, activity funds interest funds. It's a trickle down effect. If you have 5 or 6 high standard international shows in Ireland, and your breeders coming to them, they'll have interest, they'll have goals, they'll have, you know.
And have we the foundation stock to breed these international horses now?
Well, Greg is the biggest breeder here, so.
I think it needs help, and breeders need more education, and like you say, as Barry said, it's a trickle down effect. If you have a better standard of facilities and a better standard of prize money, you have less of the riders leaving the country, and then you have horses are being produced better because you have a better standard of riding. If horses are being produced better, they're being sold for more money, which they're being sold for a lot more money all the time in Holland, Belgium, Germany, these countries. We're just lacking. We're lacking to be able to do it as well in Ireland because we don't have the facilities available to us. And if we have better facilities and prize money, we're going to keep a better standard of rider in the country, produce the horses to a better standard, and that will trickle down the line.
We have the mayors to do it.
If you're a breeder and you hear of a lad, he sold a horse for such an amount of money, and you might hear the story once and ignore it, but you hear it twice, 3 times, 4 times, like, I'm going to get involved in this. I want to buy a better type of mare. I want to ask that fella, what do I have to do to breed a horse that actually can make that money? The unfortunate thing is, I go to the sales in the likes of Goresbridge or Cavan, you go to the foal sales, and I can assure you, our business is absolutely flying. Like, show jumping horses is one of the best businesses you can be involved in now around Europe and stuff. Horses are really going well, but people in Ireland need to understand that and not to be afraid to invest in it. And when I go to the likes of the foal sales, meet all the farmers and the breeders, there's a bit of a disconnection between them because they don't get to meet enough of the top riders because they're not in the country. So they get this a little bit of a doom and gloom apart, that they see some of the foals that aren't well enough bred in the first place are making smaller money, and they're getting upset by it and frustrated by it. Whereas, like I said, if we had better facilities, better prize money, keep a better standard of rider in the country, because we have the best riders in the world, some of them. If we can keep some of them around us more, or even if they're not around, if we're not here all the time, if they're coming in and out more to some of these better shows and better facilities, it will raise the bar, because they'll see the actual, how big the whole thing is just outside of Ireland as well. the potential that's there is massive. But we need to invest in the country, the facilities in the country, and prize money, and I think that will raise the whole bar. If the breeders see a better standard of horse being produced more and they're making more money, they will actually get behind it. There's a at the minute, actually, I was just looking at it before I came in, there's an online auction in Belgium at the minute for just even embryos from some of the good mares in Europe. Prices they're making, there's one embryo, it's not even a foal, it's an embryo in a fertilised egg. It was making 48,000 before we walked in. But just imagine that happens once or twice in Ireland. Lads will, they'll get behind it again. They'll be like, geez, we can really do well if we have some of these better bred horses. And instead of the Irish lads all riding Continental or Belgium or Dutch horses, we start to ride the Irish horses again. It's the best place in the world to raise a horse. We have the best land. We're great horse people. We just need, the whole thing just needs a little bit of helping hand, just to raise the whole barrier.
Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Connor.
Yeah, lastly, we have no problem with our markets. I hear most people talk about the markets, declining the market. We have no problem finding the market. We have no problem with the price of our product. Our price of our product is a reflection on our training and our selection. We will take responsibility for that. And I think most other sectors need help with that. We don't need help with that at all. We need just help with what we've outlined before.
Okay. I'd like to thank Mr. O'Connor, Mr. Broderick, Mr. O'Neill and Jim Power for your contribution. It's been a very useful presentation. We will send the transcript of the meeting here today to the Minister. We'll engage with him as well.
Yes.
We're due to have him before our committee next week to discuss the Horse and Greyhound Fund, as it turns out.
Okay.
So I'm sure that may come up at that particular occasion as well. But again, thank you very much for a very useful presentation here today. As a notice for the business meeting stands adjourned until next Tuesday the 27th at 3:30 p.m. Thank you very much.